The entire story of Vinland Saga, from beginning to end, is the story of a boy who grows up believing that strength means killing his enemies, only to spend the rest of his life discovering how wrong he was. It begins with revenge, conquest, and some of the most feared warriors in the Viking world, but it ends with a farmer kneeling in foreign soil, waiting for seeds to grow. Between those two images is the life of Thorfinn Karlsefni, a child of Iceland, a soldier in England, a slave in Denmark, an explorer across Europe, and finally a man searching for a country that may not exist anywhere except in the human imagination. This is also a story that changes its meaning as it moves. At first, Vinland appears to be a physical destination, a warm and distant land beyond the Western Ocean. Later, it becomes an escape from slavery and war. Eventually, it becomes a test of whether people shaped by violence can build anything without bringing violence with them. The answer is difficult, imperfect, and sometimes heartbreaking. So settle in, because we are going through the completed story of Vinland Saga, including the final chapter of the manga and everything the anime has not yet covered. Vinland Saga is set during the early 11th century, when the North Sea was crossed by traders, settlers, mercenaries, raiders, kings, and enslaved people. Denmark was expanding its power into England. Norway was divided by competing rulers. Iceland was remote but connected to the wider Norse world by ships and stories. Christianity was spreading through Scandinavia, but the old gods had not disappeared. A man might be baptized for politics, pray to Thor before a storm, and still expect to feast in Valhalla if he died with a weapon in his hand. I truly hope my videos can help you relax, and if they do, please leave a like and subscribe for more Vinland Saga lore to fall asleep to. And let me know in the comments which character, mystery, or part of the story you'd like me to cover next. In this world, violence is not an interruption of ordinary life. For many people, violence is the system that holds ordinary life together. Farms produce food for armies. Kings collect wealth to pay warriors. Warriors capture slaves who work the farms. A successful raid creates the resources for another raid, and every victory leaves children who may one day seek revenge. Vinland Saga places its hero inside this machine, lets it shape nearly every part of him, and then asks whether a single person can ever truly step outside it. Several major figures are inspired by names preserved in medieval history and saga literature. Thorfinn Karlsefni, Gudrid, Leif Erikson, and Canute were real or traditionally recorded people, but Vinland Saga is not a documentary reconstruction of their lives. It combines sources, changes relationships, invents private motives, and places fictional characters beside historical rulers. The result uses history as a set of boundaries inside which a moral story can move. That distinction matters because the old sagas usually preserve what communities considered worth remembering: voyages, ancestry, feuds, marriages, property, and remarkable deaths. They do not give us the continuous inner life of a child who becomes a killer and later regrets it. Makoto Yukimura takes a name associated with exploration and asks what kind of emotional journey might lead a person raised in the Viking Age to cross the Atlantic without wanting conquest. The word Viking also describes an activity more than a single uniform people. The northern world includes farmers who never raid, merchants who trade peacefully in one port and deal in enslaved people in another, professional warriors, household servants, craftspeople, settlers, and political exiles. A person can move between several of these roles during one lifetime. Thorfinn's journey is dramatic partly because he passes through so many of them. Religion adds another layer. Christianity speaks of love, humility, and paradise, yet Christian kings use armies and priests travel with killers. The old warrior faith promises honor after a courageous death, yet most people harmed by war never receive a heroic song. Vinland Saga does not solve the theological argument. It watches characters take fragments from each belief system and use them to justify opposite choices. For Thorkel, a glorious death makes battle meaningful. For Willibald, ordinary human attachment falls short of divine love. For Canute, God's apparent silence becomes permission to construct paradise through government. For Thorfinn, the command to love an enemy becomes practical only after he decides that he has no enemies at all. The same age can produce each conclusion because belief is filtered through experience. Slavery is equally central. Captives are not a distant background detail. They cook, farm, carry goods, provide sexual labor, and generate the wealth that allows free men to call themselves independent. The freedom of one household is often resting on someone else's inability to leave. Thorfinn begins as the son of a free farmer, helps create slaves as a raider, becomes enslaved himself, and then tries to found a society in which the category no longer exists. The geography of the story supports this movement. Iceland represents the quiet refuge Thor's found but could not fully protect. England represents conquest on a royal scale. Ketil's Danish farm represents comfort built inside ownership. Jomsborg represents organized warrior power. Vinland represents the hope that distance can create a fresh beginning. Each place appears to offer an answer, and each reveals that people carry old systems with them. So although the plot travels thousands of miles, the deepest journey is between two definitions of strength. The first is familiar: impose your will, survive the fight, gain wealth, and make enemies fear you. The second is much harder to prove: protect without possessing, endure without submitting to hatred, and leave when remaining would require another person's defeat. Every major character stands somewhere between those definitions. Long before Thorfinn is born, his father is known as Thor's Snorrason, one of the strongest warriors among the legendary Jomsvikings. The Jomsvikings are an elite brotherhood based at the fortress of Jomsborg. They serve Danish power, live by strict military rules, and treat fearlessness in battle as the highest proof of manhood. Among them, Thor's earns the name Troll of Jom. It is the sort of name given to a fighter who seems less like a man than a creature from an old story. Thor's is not merely large or physically powerful. He has the calm awareness of someone who can read a battlefield before other men understand that the battle has begun. He knows how warriors move, where they will strike, and how to end a fight quickly. Men such as Thorkel, a gigantic Jomsviking who lives for combat, respect him as a rare equal. In another saga, Thor's might have continued winning battles until one finally killed him. Instead, something changes inside him. During the Battle of Eiturngavaga, Thor's watches men sink beneath the sea while arrows fall around them and ships break apart in the storm. The details of his realization are quiet compared with the noise of battle. He understands that victory does not make the killing meaningful. He has spent years becoming excellent at something he no longer believes a human being should do. So he abandons the battlefield, dives into the sea, and allows the Jomsvikings to believe he has died. Desertion is not a small offense. To leave the Jomsvikings is to betray comrades, commanders, and the entire idea of warrior honor. If Thor's is discovered, he can be executed, but he chooses that risk and escapes with his wife, Helga. Helga is the daughter of the Jomsviking leader Sigvaldi and the niece of Thorkel, which makes Thor's disappearance even more personal to the men he leaves behind. The couple travels far from the centers of Danish power and settles in a small village on the coast of Iceland. There the Troll of Jom becomes an ordinary farmer and fisherman. He and Helga raise two children, their older daughter Ylva and their younger son Thorfinn. The family is not wealthy. Iceland offers wind, rock, grass, cold water, and long winters, yet the life Thor builds is peaceful. He treats animals gently, helps his neighbors, and never boasts about what he once was. To the people of the village, he is a dependable but somewhat mysterious man. To Thorfinn, he is simply his father. Thorfinn grows up restless and curious. He listens to the stories of Leif Erikson, an old sailor who has traveled farther west than almost anyone in the village can imagine. Leif tells the children about Greenland, frozen seas, and a land beyond them where wild grapes grow and winters are gentler. He calls that place Vinland. In a smoky Icelandic house, Vinland sounds almost magical, a country of green fields, forests, rich soil, and warmth. For a child who has never seen anything beyond his island, it is proof that the world is much larger than the horizon. Leif's stories are based on his own voyage across the Atlantic, but to Thorfinn they feel like adventures in a heroic poem. He dreams of ships and distant coastlines. He also dreams of war. The adults around him tell stories about famous fighters, and the boys of the village imitate them with wooden weapons. Thorfinn has no understanding of what battle actually does to a person. He sees the sword his father keeps hidden and assumes it is a symbol of greatness. When he asks why his family left the lands to the east, Thor tells him that their ancestors were running away from war. Thorfinn finds this disappointing. Running away sounds cowardly. Thor tries to explain that no one is born as an enemy and that a true warrior does not need a sword, but these ideas are too large for a young boy who has been taught to admire the opposite. Thorfinn hears the words. He simply does not yet have the life experience required to understand them. The peace of the village ends when Floki arrives from Jomsborg. Floki is a cold and calculating commander who remembers exactly who Thor was. Denmark is preparing a major campaign against England, and King Sweyn has ordered the Jomsvikings to join it. Floki announces that Thor must return to military service. The request is really a threat. If Thor refuses, the village may be punished for sheltering a deserter. Thor agrees to go not because the old warrior identity has returned, but because refusing would place everyone around him in danger. The villagers, thrilled by the thought of joining a real war, volunteer to sail with him. They imagine loot, honor, and stories to tell when they return. Thor quietly dulls the blades they bring, hoping to keep them from killing or being killed. Leif offers his ship for the journey, and Helga understands that her husband is walking into a danger he cannot explain to their children. Thorfinn is told to remain in Iceland. Naturally, he hides aboard the ship instead. By the time the adults discover him, they are too far from home to turn back. Thor is angry, but beneath the anger is fear. He knows the world toward which they are sailing. Thorfinn does not. Floki has never intended for Thor to reach the Danish army. He has hired a band of mercenaries to murder him on the journey. Their leader is Askeladd, a clever half-Danish, half-Welsh commander whose smile usually means that someone else has misunderstood the situation. Askeladd has no personal quarrel with Thor's. He is simply being paid well, and he takes pride in completing difficult work through intelligence rather than brute force. Askeladd's men wait among the Faroe Islands, where steep cliffs narrow the sea into a perfect trap. Arrows descend toward Leif's ship. Thor reacts before almost anyone else. He boards the enemy vessel alone and begins dropping pirates one after another with his fists, the flat of a blade, and precise strikes. He does not kill them. This is important. The man once feared as the Troll of Jom is still strong enough to destroy a ship full of warriors, but his strength is now controlled by a principle none of them understand. Askeladd sees immediately that an ordinary fight will not defeat Thor's. He agrees to a duel and offers to release the others if Thor wins. Thor overpowers him. For a moment, Askeladd even seems curious about following this remarkable man, but the duel was never the real plan. Archers remain hidden on the cliffs, and Thorfinn and the villagers are helpless beneath their bows. Thor could continue fighting and perhaps kill Askeladd, but doing so would condemn everyone he came to protect. He lowers his weapon and accepts the result. Before the arrows are released, he tells Askeladd that a true warrior does not need a sword. Then the volley strikes him. Thor dies standing in front of his son. The moment creates the central wound of Thorfinn's life. He has just watched his father demonstrate the highest form of courage, but he understands it as defeat. He does not see that Thor's won the lives of everyone else without taking a life himself. He sees only that Askeladd cheated, that his father died, and that someone must pay. Askeladd keeps his agreement and lets Leif and the villagers go. Thorfinn, however, remains behind. He hides aboard Askeladd's ship, follows the mercenaries, and eventually confronts their leader with his father's dagger. He is a small child challenging a professional killer. Askeladd could kill him easily, but Thorfinn's fury amuses him. More importantly, it can be useful. Askeladd promises Thorfinn the chance to duel him if the boy earns it through work. From that point onward, revenge becomes both Thorfinn's purpose and the chain that keeps him beside the man he hates. He tells himself that he must kill Askeladd honorably, in a fair fight, because that is how a warrior avenges his father. Yet every mission he completes for the right to that duel turns him further into the kind of person his father tried to save him from becoming. Years pass, Thorfinn grows up inside Askeladd's band. He learns to scout, climb walls, move through forests, survive cold nights, and kill before stronger opponents can use their size. He fights with two short blades, staying low and attacking with speed. His body remains small, but his reflexes become extraordinary. His expression hardens. The curious child who once listened to stories about Vinland disappears beneath dirt, scars, and anger. The mercenaries move wherever war creates an opportunity. They raid settlements, sell their service, betray employers, and take anything valuable enough to carry. Thorfinn tells himself he is separate from them because he does not drink with them or laugh at their cruelty. In reality, he helps make their cruelty possible. When Askeladd needs a gate opened, a commander killed, or a message carried through enemy territory, he sends Thorfinn. One of these jobs takes them to a Frankish fortress. Two groups are fighting over a heavily defended town, and Askeladd offers to help the attackers. Thorfinn scales the walls, kills his way inside, and opens a path for the mercenaries. As soon as the town falls, Askeladd steals the treasure and escapes by river, leaving his temporary allies behind. It is a perfect example of how his band survives. Other warriors trust strength, numbers, or honor. Askeladd trusts the fact that most people are predictable when they want something. After the battle, Thorfinn receives the duel he was promised. He attacks with all the speed and hatred he has accumulated. Askeladd defeats him again. The problem is not that Thorfinn lacks skill. The problem is that Askeladd controls his emotions. A few insults about Thor's are enough to make Thorfinn abandon strategy and charge blindly. As long as revenge determines every movement, Askeladd knows exactly what he will do. This becomes the pattern of Thorfinn's adolescence. He performs a dangerous task, demands a duel, loses his temper, and wakes on the ground no closer to his goal. Askeladd is simultaneously his enemy, employer, teacher, and the nearest thing he has to a guardian. The relationship is poisonous, but it is also the only structure left in Thorfinn's life. Leif Erikson does not stop looking for him. Years after returning to Iceland, he searches ports and slave markets, following rumors of a young warrior from the north. Back home, Helga waits and Ylva keeps the farm alive. Thorfinn never sees what his disappearance has done to them. Revenge narrows his world until the only person who seems to matter is Askeladd. The distance between Thorfinn and his family is not measured only in miles. In Iceland, time continues through births, funerals, fishing seasons, and harvests. Ylva grows from the sister who teased him into the practical center of the household. She marries and raises children. Helga becomes older and frailer, although she never accepts that her son is gone forever. Every ordinary year at home is a life Thorfinn could have known and does not even think to miss. On campaign, he occasionally brushes against that lost possibility. During the fighting in England, a woman and her daughter find him injured and take him inside. They cannot speak his language, and they have no reason to know that he belongs to the army threatening their country. They feed him, clean his wounds, and treat him as a lost child. For a brief time, he occupies the place he might have held in a peaceful family. When the Danish force advances, Thorfinn warns them to flee, but the warning comes too late to prevent the larger machinery of invasion from reaching ordinary homes. He returns to Askeladd's men because his revenge still feels more real than the kindness he has received. The episode passes quickly, yet it reveals the division inside him. He is capable of recognizing innocent people. He simply has not found a purpose strong enough to make him leave the killers. Askeladd understands this weakness because he has built his own life around a private hatred. He teaches Thorfinn the habits of war without ever offering the affection of a father. He tells him when the wind will change, how to notice an ambush, why a hungry army will move toward a particular village, and which proud commander can be manipulated with an insult. These lessons keep Thorfinn alive. They also make it harder for him to imagine survival anywhere outside the band. The other mercenaries watch the boy grow and gradually accept him as part of their world. Some laugh when he demands another duel. Some respect the impossible missions he completes. None of them seriously challenge the arrangement, because a child soldier is not strange in a society where usefulness can replace childhood. Thorfinn's suffering is exceptional in its intensity, but ordinary in the way adults make room for it. This is why his battles can look exciting while the story keeps returning to the people underneath them. Thorfinn can leap between ships, run along walls, and defeat men twice his size. Every display of skill advances his revenge and delays his growth. The better he becomes at surviving violence, the more completely violence determines who he is. Even his concept of honor serves Askeladd. Thorfinn insists on a fair duel because he wants his vengeance to mean more than an assassination. Askeladd knows that the rule guarantees his own safety between duels. If Thorfinn cared only about killing him, he could strike while the commander slept. Instead, the boy waits for permission from the man he hates. Revenge has made him obedient. Askeladd sometimes seems to provoke him simply for amusement, but he is also measuring whether Thorfinn can think. Each defeat says the same thing in a language the boy refuses to hear. Rage is a handle another person can hold. Thors understood that freedom required refusing the entire contest. Thorfinn believes freedom will arrive after one final victory inside it. By 1013, King Sweyn's invasion of England draws all of these lives into a much larger conflict. Danish forces spread across the country, taking towns and demanding submission. The English king, Ethelred, has fled, but London continues to resist. Its most dangerous defender is Thorkel the Tall, the enormous Jomsviking who once admired Thors. Thorkel is almost a parody of the heroic warrior Thorfinn once imagined. He is cheerful, honest, fearless, and catastrophically violent. He can throw logs like spears, crush armored men, and laugh while arrows strike him. He has joined the English not because he loves England, but because defending London offers a better fight. Politics bore him, peace depresses him. A battlefield is the only place where the world makes perfect sense. Thorfinn is sent to attack him and discovers how far he still is from the strongest warriors of his age. Thorkel recognizes Thor's fighting style in the young man and becomes delighted when he learns whose son he is. Their battle is brutal. Thorfinn manages to injure the giant, but Thorkel overwhelms him, yet Thorkel does not kill him. He wants to see what Thor's son may become, and he is fascinated by a question Thor's left behind: what is a true warrior? The Danish army eventually avoids London and continues its conquest. Thorkel becomes frustrated by the lack of worthy battles. When he learns that the Danish prince Canute is moving through the country, he attacks the prince's forces and captures him, hoping to force King Sweyn into a confrontation. Canute appears to be the opposite of Thorkel. He is young, delicate, quiet, and hidden behind the protection of his guardian Ragnar. He rarely speaks to strangers. He prefers cooking to commanding soldiers and prays with the priest Willibald. Many Danes mock him as weak. His older brother Harald is expected to inherit Denmark, which leaves Canute politically useful but personally vulnerable. A prince with royal blood can become a rallying point, even if he has no desire to rule. Askeladd recognizes that value. He offers to rescue Canute from Thorkel, but his true intention is to control the prince and use him as leverage within the Danish succession. The rescue becomes a chase across winter England. Askeladd's band takes Canute, Ragnar, Willibald, and a small group of followers, while Thorkel pursues them with the enthusiasm of a man following an invitation to a feast. To escape, Askeladd guides the group west into Wales. This reveals a part of him that most of his men have never understood. His mother was a Welsh woman named Lydia, taken and enslaved by his Danish father Olaf. She taught her son that their people were descendants of ancient Britain and told him stories about the hero Artorius, a rightful king who would return to save them from invaders. Askeladd's birth name is Lucius Artorius Castus. He despises the Danish father who used and discarded his mother, and he despises much of the Viking world that father represents. As a child, he pretended to admire Olaf, gained his trust, murdered him, and arranged for another son to receive the blame. The charming mercenary leader has been acting for most of his life. Wales is the one land for which his loyalty is sincere. He negotiates passage with Welsh leaders by promising that Prince Canute will protect them once he gains power. His men, who believed their commander was simply a shrewd Dane, are confused by his knowledge of the language and his willingness to take risks for people they consider poor and foreign. Thorfinn learns pieces of this history, but revenge leaves him unable to imagine that Askeladd might contain anything beyond the role of his father's killer. The group returns to English territory as winter closes around them. Supplies become scarce, snow slows the wagons, and Thorkel continues to approach. Askeladd decides to hide in a small village whose people are preparing for Christmas. The villagers are English Christians. They have food stored for winter, families gathered inside timber houses, and no ability to resist 100 armed men. Askeladd's band takes the village and kills almost everyone in it to prevent information from reaching Thorkel. It is one of the clearest demonstrations of what Viking adventure looks like from the other side. The victims are not soldiers in a glorious contest. They are parents, children, and elderly farmers pushed into a ditch. Thorfinn participates in the occupation and watches the bodies disappear beneath snow. The decision is strategically understandable in the narrowest sense. Askeladd needs food, concealment, and time. If even one villager reaches Thorkel, the pursuers will know the route. That logic is exactly what makes the massacre frightening. No one in the band needs to wake with a mysterious desire to murder a village. They need only accept the commander's goal, then treat every person who threatens it as a problem to remove. Askeladd keeps his voice calm because emotion would only slow the work. He is capable of admiring Roman history, protecting Wales, remembering his enslaved mother, and reading a political room more clearly than almost anyone alive. None of that prevents him from ordering children killed. Intelligence and cultural sophistication do not automatically produce compassion. They can make cruelty more efficient. His men follow for different reasons. Some enjoy the power, some fear disobedience. Some regard English villagers as people outside the circle of obligation. Some simply do what they have done in other settlements. Collective violence reduces the moral weight felt by each participant. The band did it, the commander ordered it, the war required it, and therefore no individual has to say, "This death exists because of me." Thorfinn's emotional isolation allows the same escape. He is not loyal to the Danes and does not celebrate their conquest. He considers himself a person with one private mission who happens to travel among them. Yet the villagers cannot see that private distinction. To them, the silent young scout is part of the force that ended their world. The story will later make Thorfinn confront precisely this gap between how he explained himself and what his actions meant to others. Anne's survival preserves the perspective the warriors would prefer to erase. She is not a commander who can punish them or a heroic avenger who restores balance. She is a frightened young person who continues living after everyone familiar is gone. Her existence denies the killers a clean ending. Somewhere outside their camp, consequence keeps breathing. The winter landscape makes the crime feel even quieter. Snow covers the road, muffles movement, and hides the grave. Christmas approaches, a festival dedicated to the birth of a savior, while a Christian village lies dead beneath the cold. Willibald's search for love is not taking place in a protected monastery. It is happening beside evidence of what human beings do when love stops at the boundary of tribe. Ragnar's death follows the same structure on a smaller scale. Askeladd believes one innocent and devoted man must die so Canute can become independent. Politically, the calculation succeeds. Canute changes after losing him. Morally, success does not make the betrayal clean. The story keeps placing effective violence beside its human cost, so that outcome can never be mistaken for innocence. Even Canute's awakening contains this danger from the beginning. He looks at a world shaped by domination and decides that someone compassionate must gain enough domination to change it. The desire is sincere. The contradiction is already present. His future rule will repeatedly ask whether power can be used to abolish the conditions that power itself creates. One girl, Anne, survives because she had secretly left her home. She has stolen a ring and believes that theft may have condemned her soul. When she returns, she finds her entire community murdered. Her small private fear of divine punishment is swallowed by a human horror far greater than anything she imagined. She later sees the northern lights and wonders what God can see from heaven. The question hangs over the story: if a loving God sees all of this, why does the world remain as it is? That same question consumes Willibald. The priest travels with the warriors while drinking heavily and searching for the meaning of love. He does not mean affection, desire, or preference. Those feelings choose one person over another. A parent protects one child while an enemy kills someone else's. A king loves his country and invades another. Willibald is looking for a love without discrimination, a love offered equally to every living thing. Canute has been sheltered from the world by Ragnar's devotion. Ragnar genuinely loves the prince, but his protection has also kept Canute dependent. Askeladd decides that Canute will never become useful while Ragnar remains alive. He arranges an ambush and has him killed, while making the death appear to be the work of their enemies. Ragnar dies in Canute's arms. Before the prince can recover, the political situation collapses. Thorkel is near. Askeladd's exhausted men have lost faith in their leader. They realize that surrendering Canute may save them, and most of them turn against Askeladd. The commander, who has manipulated everyone around him, finally miscalculates the loyalty of men who have followed him for years. Bjorn remains beside him. Bjorn is Askeladd's oldest companion, a powerful fighter who uses mushrooms to enter a berserker rage. He cares for Askeladd more deeply than Askeladd is comfortable admitting. During the mutiny, Bjorn consumes the mushroom, loses control, and fights their former comrades while helping Canute escape. Thorfinn also returns, partly because he refuses to let anyone except himself kill Askeladd. While the band tears itself apart, Canute experiences the inner change that will reshape Northern Europe. In grief, he dreams of Ragnar and finally understands that even the most devoted human affection is limited. Willibald explains that the dead body before them no longer hates, favors, demands, or excludes. In that sense, death resembles the unconditional love the priest has been seeking. Human beings, divided by desire and judgment, have lost the ability to love perfectly. Canute responds not with surrender but rebellion. If God has placed people in a world of suffering and asks them to reach a paradise they cannot attain, then Canute will build a paradise on earth himself. He will use royal power to end the chaos around him. It is an awakening, but not a gentle one. The timid prince becomes calm, commanding, and willing to sacrifice lives for an ideal future. When Thorkel's army surrounds them, Canute walks forward and takes control of the situation. He speaks to Thorkel without fear, challenges the giant's empty pursuit of battle, and convinces him to change sides. Thorkel recognizes the presence of a leader. The surviving mutineers from Askeladd's band are slaughtered, and Askeladd himself enters Canute's service. Thorfinn fights Thorkel again during this crisis. He cannot overpower the giant, so Askeladd gives him a piece of knowledge. Thorkel has a vulnerable jaw from an old injury. Thorfinn uses his speed, the angle of the sun, and the opening Askeladd has identified to bring Thorkel down. It is a strange victory. To earn another duel with Askeladd, Thorfinn relies on Askeladd's guidance. Even his progress toward revenge depends on the man he wants to kill. Canute now has a plan. His father, King Sweyn, considers him expendable and may have sent him into danger to remove a possible rival to Harald. Canute will return to the Danish court, gather supporters, and force Sweyn to recognize his value. Askeladd sees a chance to create a ruler who will protect Wales. Thorkel sees a chance for larger wars. Each man joins the prince for a different reason. Before they can move forward, Bjorn asks Askeladd for a final duel. The berserker mushroom has left him badly wounded, and he knows he is dying. What he wants is not simply a warrior's death. He wants Askeladd to admit they were friends. Askeladd gives him the duel and kills him, but his precision fails for a moment, causing Bjorn additional pain. The mistake reveals emotion in a man who normally hides it perfectly. Only after striking the final blow does Askeladd acknowledge the friendship Bjorn wanted. Thorfinn then receives his own duel. He attacks as he always has, and Askeladd defeats him as he always has. This time Askeladd tells him the truth more directly. Thorfinn has spent years gaining combat skill but has not grown in the way that matters. He still allows a few words to control him. He has no plan for the life beyond revenge. Askeladd even tells him to become a true warrior like Thor's. Coming from the man responsible for Thor's death, the advice sounds unbearable. Yet it is also the lesson Thorfinn will eventually need. Canute's party reaches the royal court at Gainsborough and then follows King Sweyn toward York. The king is experienced, patient, and dangerous. He sees the transformation in his younger son and understands that Canute is now a political rival. Canute, Askeladd, and Thorkel build support among commanders while searching for a way to survive the king's next move. Sweyn discovers Askeladd's attachment to Wales. During a royal banquet, he announces an intention to invade it. The threat forces Askeladd into an impossible choice. If he obeys, he betrays his mother's homeland. If he refuses, he exposes Canute's faction and condemns the prince. Sweyn enjoys the trap because it proves that every man, however clever, has something he cannot sacrifice. Askeladd finds a third path, but it costs him everything. He steps before the court, declares his true name, Lucius Artorius Castus, and kills King Sweyn. Then he performs madness. He attacks the guards and presents himself as a deranged traitor acting alone. By becoming the obvious villain, he separates Canute from the assassination and protects Wales from the immediate invasion. The whole erupts. Askeladd cuts through warrior after warrior while the court watches the legendary strategist turn his own death into a final political move. Canute understands what must happen. To claim authority and prevent anyone from questioning his loyalty, the prince drives his sword into Askeladd. Thorfinn arrives too late. For 11 years, he has organized his entire existence around killing this one man. Now Askeladd is dying in front of him by someone else's hand. Thorfinn catches him, and Askeladd uses his final breath to tell the boy to move forward, go farther than Thor's went, and become a true warrior. Then he dies. Thorfinn does not feel free. He feels as though the ground beneath his life has vanished. He attacks Canute in blind grief and cuts the prince's face. The guard sees him. Canute could order his execution, but instead he has Thorfinn sold into slavery. The prologue of Vinland Saga ends there, with Canute beginning his rise as a king and Thorfinn dragged away in chains. The boy believed revenge would restore the meaning stolen by his father's death. Instead, revenge consumed his childhood, helped him kill countless strangers, and left him with nothing when its object disappeared. For the first time since he climbed onto Askeladd's ship, Thorfinn has no enemy to follow and no purpose at all. About a year and a half later, the story returns not through Thorfinn but through a young English farmer named Einar. Einar lives in a small village in northern England with his mother and his younger sister Lotta. He is strong, earnest, and proud of the land he works. War has already taken his father, but the family has rebuilt. Their fields are not grand, yet they provide a life rooted in ordinary things. Seed, rain, harvest, meals, and the expectation that tomorrow's work will resemble today's. Viking raiders destroy that expectation. Einar tries to defend his home, but courage without training does little against armed men. His mother is killed. Lotta fights back and is killed as well. Einar is captured, carried across the sea, and placed in a line of human beings for sale. His journey into slavery strips away every form of control. Captives who become sick are abandoned. A woman is thrown overboard when she can no longer continue. Einar attempts to escape, only to discover that he does not know the country, the language of everyone around him, or the direction of home. When he is caught, the traders beat him and return him to the market. A wealthy Danish landowner named Ketil buys him. Ketil presents himself as a reasonable master. On the wagon ride to his estate, he explains that Einar can eventually purchase his freedom by working. Ketil will allow him to clear unused forest, plant wheat, and keep a portion of what the crop earns. It may take years, but there is at least a path out of bondage. At the edge of the forest, Einar meets the other slave assigned to the job. The man is thin, scarred, and almost completely silent. His hair has grown longer, his eyes seem empty, and he accepts every instruction without interest. This is Thorfinn. The contrast between them is immediate. Einar has lost his family and freedom, but he is still furious enough to want both back. Thorfinn behaves as though there is no self left to rescue. If a tree falls on him, if a master beats him, or if tomorrow never comes, he appears not to care. He works because he has been told to work. Together they begin clearing the forest. It is slow, exhausting labor. They cut trees, pull roots, move stones, break earth that has never been plowed, and sleep in a rough shelter. Vinland Saga has moved from battlefields to farming, but the change is not a retreat from its main question. The story is now asking what strength looks like when the task is not destroying something but making life possible. Einar knows how to farm, Thorfinn does not. Einar teaches him to judge soil, handle tools, and prepare a field. In return, Thorfinn works with relentless endurance. The two men eat together and gradually speak. Einar is shocked to learn that Thorfinn once fought alongside the same kind of raiders who destroyed his village. For a moment, he imagines strangling him in his sleep. But Thorfinn does not defend his past. He does not claim that war made his actions necessary or that he was following orders. He barely seems to believe he deserves to wake up. Einar cannot bring himself to kill a man who already lives like a ghost. Thorfinn's past returns each night in dreams. Sometimes he sees a peaceful life he can no longer reach. Sometimes he falls into a pit where the people he killed claw at him from a mountain of bodies. He does not remember every face, which makes the horror worse. These strangers lost their lives during missions he regarded as steps toward a private duel. They were the background of his revenge, but he was the final moment of their existence. In the dream, Askeladd appears above the pit. Even in death, he remains the voice capable of provoking Thorfinn into movement. He tells him to climb. Thorfinn cannot erase what he did, and falling into despair will not restore anyone. He must carry the dead, climb with their weight, and fight the real battle that begins after a warrior puts down his weapon. Thorfinn wakes screaming. Einar holds him until the nightmare passes. It may be the first uncomplicated act of friendship Thorfinn has received since childhood. Einar has every reason to hate Vikings and every reason to judge him, yet he sees a damaged human being and chooses to help. Life on Ketil's farm is not equally cruel to everyone. Ketil prefers to think of himself as a kind man. He pays free workers, allows slaves to earn freedom, and avoids unnecessary conflict. His farm has grown rich enough that people call him Iron Fist Ketil, imagining he was once a legendary warrior. The reputation helps protect his property, but it is largely a lie. Ketil fears pain and has no appetite for battle. This does not make him harmless. A master can be gentle on a pleasant day and still possess the legal power to sell, punish, or kill another person. Ketil's kindness exists inside a system built on ownership. The slaves must remain grateful because their future depends on his mood. The person closest to him is Arnheid, a woman enslaved as a personal attendant. Ketil seeks comfort from her and imagines their intimacy as love, but Arnheid cannot freely refuse him or leave. Einar is immediately drawn to her warmth. The three slaves become friends, sharing meals and small moments of relief while working toward futures none can fully control. Ketil's father, Sverkel, lives in a modest house on the estate. The old man distrusts the wealth and vanity surrounding his son. He offers Thorfinn and Einar the use of his horse if they help with his own fields. He teaches them that land must be cared for and that a farmer should not take more than he needs. His practical advice accelerates their work, and his home becomes a place where they can briefly exist as people rather than property. Sverkel is guarded by a skilled warrior known as Snake. Snake leads the farm's armed guests, men paid with food and shelter to protect the estate. Unlike many of them, he is educated and controlled. He can read Latin scripture to Sverkel, and he carries a curved sword from lands far to the south and east. His real name and past remain mostly hidden. Like Askeladd, he is a man who has traveled through violence long enough to see its emptiness without being able to leave it behind. One day, Snake's men decide to use Thorfinn for entertainment. A violent guest named Fox explains that a man earns respect by killing and that a sword is hungry for flesh. He begins cutting Thorfinn again and again, expecting terror. Thorfinn simply stands there. He says he has no enemies. No one in the world deserves to be hurt. It is the idea Thor's tried to give him as a child, but now Thorfinn understands the price of it. Saying that he has no enemies does not mean no one will attack him. It means he refuses to turn another person into a category that makes cruelty feel righteous. The belief is still fragile. At this point, it is mixed with his lack of concern for his own life. Snake stops the torture and knocks him down, proving that Thorfinn's old instincts remain. His body reacts to danger, even when his conscious mind wants to disappear. Ketil's younger son, Almer, watches all of this while desperately trying to become a warrior. Almer is inexperienced, insecure, and ashamed of farm life. He dreams of joining King Canute's army because society has taught him that sowing wheat is ordinary while stabbing strangers is glorious. The older men flatter him, manipulate him, and laugh behind his back. His brother Thorgil is the fighter Almer thinks he wants to be, confident, lethal, and perfectly adapted to a violent world. Thorfinn once resembled Almer, although he was much more capable. Both confuse adulthood with the willingness to kill. The difference is that Thorfinn has reached the end of that road and knows there is nothing there. The wheat field becomes the measure of Thorfinn and Einar's new life. They plant their first crop and watch green shoots emerge from ground that was previously forest. For Einar, farming reconnects him to the family he lost. For Thorfinn, each plant is something he has helped create rather than destroy. He begins speaking more. He smiles. He even admits that he wants to live. Then farmhands who resent the slaves tear the crop from the earth. Months of work are destroyed in a night. Einar explodes. He wants to attack them and Thorfinn tries to stop him, but the confrontation becomes a fistfight. Thorfinn is knocked unconscious and sees his father again in a dream. Thor asks who all the people beneath them are. Thorfinn finally confesses the truth to himself. They are the people he killed. When he wakes, he makes a vow. He will never hurt anyone again. He will remove violence from his life and find another way, even when another way seems impossible. He and Einar reconcile with the farmhands and their work continues. This is not presented as a magical cure. Thorfinn still carries trauma, guilt, and reflexes shaped by years of combat. The vow is a direction, not an instant transformation. The farm gives him a place to practice that direction on uneventful days. Most moral change does not happen in a dramatic confrontation. It happens when Thorfinn gets up, shares food, checks the tools, and returns to soil that does not care what kind of warrior he used to be. The work is repetitive, but repetition is exactly what his damaged mind needs. A field asks for patience instead of fury. Einar refuses to let Thorfinn turn guilt into another form of self-importance. The dead matter, but so do the living people standing beside him. When Thorfinn speaks as though he has no right to happiness, Einar answers through friendship, arguments, and the expectation that he will keep working tomorrow. Atonement is not suffering forever, it is becoming useful to life. Their friendship also crosses the identity that once separated them. Einar is English and has every reason to hate Danes. Thorfinn is Icelandic but spent his youth helping a Danish army. On the farm, those categories cannot explain everything. Both are enslaved, both have lost family, both are learning to raise wheat under a master who owns the result. The daily truth of another person becomes stronger than the inherited name of an enemy. Sverkel contributes a harsher kind of wisdom. He knows that wealth expands a person's obligations faster than it expands contentment. Ketil's farm has become so large that armed men are needed to defend it, retainers are needed to control the laborers, and political protection is needed to keep the king away. Each layer of security creates another dependency. Sverkel would rather cultivate enough land to live than possess so much land that possession becomes a permanent fear. Snake listens to the old man read from the Christian scriptures, especially the teachings that ask people to love an enemy. He is moved by the words without pretending he can simply obey them. If a violent man comes for the farm, Snake will draw his sword. His presence prevents the story from making Thorfinn's vow too easy. A principle can be beautiful, and a protector can still ask who bears the consequence when the principle fails. Peter offers another model. He was once enslaved, earned his freedom, and now works as a supervisor. Because he remembers powerlessness, he investigates the destroyed wheat rather than accepting the free workers' version of events. He cannot abolish the system, but he can use his limited authority to protect people within it. Vinland Saga repeatedly values these modest interventions. A person does not need to control a kingdom to reduce suffering in front of him. Thorfinn and Einar eventually harvest enough to shorten the distance to freedom. They count crops in seasons rather than battles. The cleared field widens, the stumps disappear, and the men who began as strangers start speaking of what they will do when they are no longer property. Einar imagines an ordinary farm. Thorfinn begins to speak about Vinland. He remembers Leif's childhood stories and finally understands why a distant country mattered to his father. It was never valuable merely because grapes grew there. Distance offered a chance to step outside the political order that turns farms into taxes, taxes into armies, armies into raids, and raids into slaves. Thorfinn proposes a settlement for people who have nowhere safe to run. Einar immediately sees the difficulty. A farm requires land, tools, seed, animals, builders, and years of labor. Crossing the ocean requires ships and experienced crews. Ideals cannot replace any of these things, but he also recognizes the purpose beneath the dream. They will create a place where Arnheid and people like her could have lived without belonging to anyone. This conversation turns Vinland from memory into a plan. As a child, Thorfinn wanted to reach it because adventure sounded glorious. As an adult, he wants to reach it because he has seen what the existing world does to people without protection. The same western horizon now carries the opposite meaning. While Thorfinn learns to live without enemies, Canute is trying to create peace by defeating all of his. After Sweyn's death, Canute becomes King of England through war, negotiation, and assassination. He forms a temporary arrangement with the English Prince Edmund, but Edmund soon dies, leaving Canute in control. Canute later becomes King of Denmark as well after the illness and death of his brother Harald. The gentle prince has become a beautiful and frightening ruler. He is intelligent, disciplined, and sincerely committed to building a paradise on earth. Yet maintaining armies and uniting kingdoms requires money. Canute begins taking rich estates to fund his occupation of England. His goal is stability, but the method is the same force used by every king before him. The crown is often represented as a curse speaking into his mind. A ruler may begin with compassion, but power teaches him to view people as pieces. Canute poisons, threatens, and sacrifices while telling himself that the final kingdom will justify the road taken to reach it. He and Thorfinn are moving in opposite directions. One powerless slave is rejecting violence completely. One powerful king is accepting more of it for the sake of peace. Canute's attention eventually falls on Ketil's farm. It is large, wealthy, and vulnerable to royal seizure. Ketil happens to be visiting the court with Thorgil and Alma when the plan forms. Alma attempts to join the king's guard but humiliates himself during a test. Canute's agents then arrange an insult, knowing the young man will react. Alma kills a messenger with Thorgil's help, giving the crown a legal excuse to declare Ketil's family criminal and confiscate the estate. Ketil, Thorgil, and Alma flee. Leif Erikson is also present, still following every rumor that might lead him to Thorfinn. He has grown older, but he has never abandoned the promise of bringing his friend's son home. The fugitives hide aboard Leif's ship and return to the farm ahead of Knut's forces. Before the king arrives, another story of slavery reaches its breaking point. Arnheid was once a free woman with a husband named Gardar and a young son named Hjolti. Their village discovered a source of iron, and the men left to fight a neighboring community for control of it. With the defenders gone, raiders attacked. Hjolti was killed, Arnheid was sold, and Gardar was enslaved elsewhere. A resource the men believed would make their village secure instead created the absence that destroyed it. Gardar escapes and comes to Ketil's estate searching for his wife. He has been brutalized by slavery and driven by a desperate image of restoring the family he lost. He kills several of Snake's men. When Arnheid sees him, the past she had buried returns all at once. She is also pregnant with Ketil's child, making escape even more complicated. Arnheid frees Gardar after he is captured. During the escape, Gardar kills one of the guards and the farm erupts into a manhunt. Sverkel, Thorfinn, Einar and Peter, a kind overseer who was once enslaved himself, try to hide the couple. For Thorfinn, the crisis creates the first severe test of his vow. Snake is not a monster. His men were killed and he believes he has a duty to stop Gardar. Talking may not be enough. Thorfinn chooses to fight Snake with empty hands. He returns to the movements of his old life but changes their purpose. He dodges, blocks and tries to create time without killing. Snake is fast enough to recognize that the quiet farm slave was once an extraordinary warrior. Their duel shows that refusing violence is not the same as being physically weak. Thorfinn possesses the ability to harm Snake and deliberately limits himself. The plan still fails. Snake reaches Gardar and wounds him. Arnheid drives her husband away in a cart, but he is already dying. In his fading mind, the years of slavery disappear. He imagines going home with his wife and son, returning to the life before iron, pride, and war took everything. Arnheid holds him as the journey ends. Gardar's final vision is gentle because reality has offered him no gentle return. He does not imagine defeating the men who enslaved him or recovering the iron that began the feud. He imagines an apology, a familiar road, and the family before separation. The warrior he became is revealed as a person trying to reach an ordinary life through methods that make the journey impossible. Arnheid understands before he does that Hjolti is gone. She allows Gardar to speak as if their son waits at home, because correcting a dying man would serve no one. Her compassion is not passive acceptance. It is a final gift made by someone who has been forced to absorb other people's decisions for years. The story refuses to make escape morally simple. Gardar is a victim of slavery, and the people he kills are gods participating in that system. But some of those men have families, friendships, and their own limited choices. Snake's pursuit is not driven by contempt for enslaved people. He wants justice for men under his protection. Every relationship creates another valid grief, and violence ties them together until saving one person appears to require wounding another. Thorfinn's fight with Snake therefore cannot produce a clean victory. If he defeats Snake, Gardar may escape, but the dead gods remain. If he steps aside, Arnheid loses her husband again. If he kills, he breaks the vow that is keeping his own humanity alive. He chooses the least harmful path he can see and still fails to create the outcome he wants. This failure teaches a lesson that will become crucial in Vinland. Refusing to kill does not make Thorfinn the author of everyone else's choices. He can create time, offer another path, and place his body between people. He cannot guarantee that fear, injury, and misunderstanding will stop. A peaceful method can be morally right and still lose the immediate contest. Einar's response to Arnheid reveals the same tension. He loves her and wants to imagine a future in which freedom allows that love to grow. Yet Arnheid's inner life remains connected to Gardar and Hjolti. She is more than the object of Einar's hope, just as she is more than the object of Ketil's possession. Loving her requires accepting a story that does not place him at its center. Ketil cannot make that acceptance. He has interpreted Arnheid's dependence as proof that she belongs emotionally as well as legally. When Gardar returns, Ketil sees a rival taking what is his. The beating exposes how quickly affection built on unequal power can become punishment. He does not suddenly transform into a different man. The authority that was always present is finally used without restraint. Peter tries to stop him because he knows what a master's rage can do. Einar wants to stop him but is kept away by force. The surrounding men hesitate because Ketil owns the farm and the woman he is beating. Law, employment, debt, and habit hold people still while one person commits the act. Violence is rarely sustained by the attacker alone. Arnheid's death gives the Vinland project its ethical center. The future settlement is not named for a queen, explorer, or warrior. It is named for someone history would normally fail to record, an enslaved woman whose choices were narrowed by war at every stage. Whenever the settlers later argue about weapons, land, and leaving, her name silently asks whether the village exists for human freedom or for the pride of its builders. Ketil returns to find his farm in crisis and the woman he depends on accused of escape. Humiliated by Canute, terrified of losing his property and jealous of Gardar, he releases all of his fear as violence against someone who cannot resist. He beats Arnheid with a wooden club even after Peter begs him to stop. The supposedly gentle master reveals the ownership beneath his affection. Arnheid survives for a time, but her injuries are fatal. The unborn child dies with her. Einar sits beside her, devastated and furious. Thorfinn sees another innocent life destroyed by the world he is trying to escape. When Arnheid imagines Gardar and Hjolti waiting beyond death, Thorfinn asks her to tell them about a peaceful place they intend to build. He does not yet know where that place is or how they will reach it. He only knows that the world must contain somewhere for people who are running from war and slavery. Canute's fleet reaches the farm. Ketil gathers hundreds of workers and tenants, promising to cancel debts and reward anyone who fights for him. Most have little training. Opposing them are professional Jomsvikings who operate with terrifying discipline. Ketil tells himself that numbers and local pride will win. Thorgil knows the truth but welcomes the battle anyway. The result is a massacre. Canute's soldiers cut through the farmers. Thorgil swims around the lines and nearly kills the king in a surprise attack, but Canute survives. Ketil charges in a frenzy and is struck down by Snake. The farm he tried to defend as his personal kingdom is broken in a single day. Almer finally becomes brave at the moment he admits he is not a warrior. He sees that his vanity helped create the disaster and chooses to surrender, even though Thorgil calls it cowardice. Accepting humiliation to save other people requires more courage than the performance of manhood that began the conflict. Thorfinn decides to speak with Canute and end the attack. The king's guards refuse to let a slave approach. One of them, Drought, agrees only if Thorfinn can endure 100 punches without fighting back. The surrounding soldiers treat it as entertainment. Thorfinn accepts. Blow after blow lands on his face and body. He does not defend himself. This is not because pain has no meaning to him anymore. He endures it for a specific purpose. Every punch he absorbs is one less excuse for a larger fight. When he remains standing after the 100th blow, the warriors fall silent. Many of them have spent their lives believing that strength is the power to make another person fall. Thorfinn demonstrates a strength they do not know how to measure. Drought begins the contest as a man certain that status protects him from shame. The slave in front of him has no weapon, title, or army. Each punch should confirm the distance between them. Instead, the distance closes. Thorfinn's refusal to hate him turns the violence back into a question Drought must answer for himself. By the end, the soldiers are no longer laughing because endurance has made the entertainment morally visible. Thorfinn says that he does not need to hate these men because he has only just met them. To a warrior culture, this sounds almost absurd. Armies depend on people treating strangers as enemies before any personal wrong has occurred. Uniform, language, lord, and position do the work that individual hatred cannot. Thorfinn breaks that convenience by insisting that a stranger remains a person. The 100 punches also transform the meaning of the body Thorfinn trained. As a child, speed allowed him to avoid pain and place it in someone else. Here, the same discipline allows him to receive pain without returning it. His strength has not disappeared, it has changed direction. Einar watches with a mixture of horror and trust. He cannot be certain the soldiers will honor the agreement. Thorfinn could suffer 100 blows and still be killed before reaching Canute. Non-violence offers no guarantee. Its power comes from creating a possibility that force would close and accepting that someone else may refuse the opening. He finally stands before Canute. The king recognizes the furious boy who once cut his face, but the person before him is almost unrecognizable. Thorfinn asks Canute to leave the farm. Canute explains the scale of his ambition. He is trying to unite the North Sea into a peaceful realm, and that project demands wealth and force. If a few must be sacrificed to save many, he will accept the burden. Thorfinn cannot defeat the king's army or offer a competing state. When Canute asks what he will do if the request is refused, Thorfinn gives an answer so unexpected that Canute laughs. He will run away. He will take the people Canute cannot protect and go beyond the reach of kings. Canute can continue pushing the world through power. Thorfinn will search for the cracks, rescue those crushed beneath it, and build somewhere else. The answer reaches the part of Canute that still remembers his earlier dream. In a world where everyone struggles to gain power, Thorfinn asks for none. Canute realizes they are pursuing the same impossible goal from opposite sides. He agrees to withdraw and changes his wider policy, reducing the need to seize Danish farms to support his English army. Their reunion is one of the story's most important reversals. In York, Canute gained a crown while Thorfinn lost the purpose that had controlled him. On Ketil's farm, the king possesses ships, soldiers, and law, while the former slave possesses only a promise about how he will live. Yet Thorfinn can offer Canute something power cannot produce. A place for the people a kingdom inevitably fails. Canute does not abandon his crown or become harmless after this conversation. He still believes centralized power can reduce the wider suffering of war. Thorfinn does not prove that all government is evil or that every conflict can be escaped. The two men divide an impossible task according to their convictions. Canute will try to decrease chaos from the center. Thorfinn will move outward with those crushed at the edge. Each path contains a danger. Canute may sacrifice so many people for the future that the promised paradise becomes indistinguishable from tyranny. Thorfinn may keep retreating until there is nowhere left to go, or ask vulnerable people to bear risks he can survive more easily than they can. Their friendship is valuable because each man reveals the weakness in the other's solution. Canute laughs when he understands this, not because the suffering is amusing, but because Thorfinn has proposed an answer outside the contest for rule. The boy who once charged a prince with a knife now refuses to compete for the prince's world. He has become politically significant precisely by declining political power. For the soldiers, the withdrawal may look like a king's sudden generosity. For Canute, it is a strategic and moral recalculation. For Thorfinn, it confirms that words can stop an army when the speaker has built enough credibility to be heard. None of those explanations cancels the others. Peace often depends on different motives briefly supporting the same decision. No duel could have produced this victory. Thorfinn saves Ketil's estate through endurance, honesty, and the willingness to walk away. It is the clearest proof yet that he has begun to understand his father. But he cannot save Arnheid. She dies before she can leave. Einar nearly attacks the unconscious Ketil in grief and Thorfinn stops him. The two friends stand beside Arnheid's grave and make a promise. They will create a country where no one is enslaved and no one is forced into war. Thorfinn remembers the land from Leif's stories. Vinland is distant, fertile, and beyond the authority of the kings who rule Europe. It becomes the name of their shared dream. Thorfinn and Einar receive their freedom. Pater reveals that their final crop earned enough to complete the agreement, and Ketil's family no longer has the power or desire to hold them. They leave with Leif, carrying no treasure beyond the plan formed beside Arnheid's grave. When Thorfinn returns to Iceland, his mother does not recognize him at first. The child who disappeared was small and bright-eyed. The man standing before Helga is scarred, weathered, and missing part of an ear. Then she sees Thor's in him and welcomes her son home. Ylva's reunion is less quiet. She spent years believing Thorfinn was probably dead and keeping the family alive without him. When she finally accepts that the stranger is her brother, she hits him with enough force to send him across the room. Beneath the comedy is a fair anger. Thorfinn's tragedy did not happen only to him. His family lived with the consequences of his absence. He tells them the truth about his life and his intention to sail west. Helga gives him her blessing. Thor's once ran to Iceland to escape war, but war eventually found him. Thorfinn wants to travel farther and build the peace his father could only describe. The dream is beautiful, it is also expensive. A colony requires ships, livestock, tools, food, and people. To reach a land beyond the known edge of the world, the former slave must first become a merchant. The most powerful landowner in Thorfinn's region is Halfdan, a hard man known for controlling debtors with heavy chains. Halfdan believes society is built by ownership, obligation, and fear. He once tried to absorb Thor's struggling farm, and years later his influence has only grown. He listens to Thorfinn's proposal but sees no reason to invest in an idealistic voyage across the Atlantic. Leif offers a different plan. Narwhal horns from the northern seas can be sold in Greece as rare and valuable objects. If they carry a shipment east, trade it successfully, and return with profit, they can finance the western expedition themselves. The route will be enormous, stretching from Iceland through northern Europe and eventually toward Miklagard, the Norse name for Constantinople. Leif's adopted son joins them. He is also named Thorfinn, so everyone calls him Bug Eyes. He was once enslaved and gained his freedom through Leif. Unlike the other Thorfinn, Bug Eyes is talkative, anxious, opportunistic, and much better suited to bargaining than combat. Einar comes as the co-founder of the Vinland Dream. Their small merchant crew begins to form. Before they leave, another traveler forces her way into the story. Gudrid grew up in Greenland listening to Leif's tales just as Thorfinn did in Iceland. She wants to sail, explore, and see the world, but the expectations placed upon a Norse woman leave little room for that life. She was married to Leif's younger brother Thorvald, who died before their marriage became a true partnership. Now she is expected to marry Halfdan's son, Sigurd. Sigurd is proud, dramatic, and desperate to prove that he deserves to inherit his father's authority. He surrounds himself with loyal friends and wears a chain as a symbol of Halfdan's power. Yet he is not cruel at heart. He assumes Gudrid will accept the marriage because that is what their families have arranged. He never seriously considers that she may want an entirely different future. On their wedding night, Gudrid attacks Sigurd with a sword and runs away. She reaches Leif's ship and begs to join the Eastern voyage. The situation is ridiculous, dangerous, and politically inconvenient. Thorfinn nevertheless understands what it means to need an escape. The crew takes her aboard. Sigurd follows with his companions, partly because Gudrid's disappearance has humiliated him, and partly because returning without her would make him look weak before Halfdan. What begins as a merchant expedition now has an angry, rejected husband chasing it across the sea. After passing through the Faroes, the travelers reach the Shetland Islands and find the aftermath of another raid. Adults have been killed, but an infant remains alive beside a protective dog. Thorfinn cannot leave the child. The crew names him Carly, and the dog becomes Carly's mama. Gudrid takes on much of the daily care, while Thorfinn quietly begins acting like a father. Carly changes the scale of every decision. Thorfinn's vow was initially about controlling his own hands. Now he must protect a child in a world where others still use weapons. It is one thing to accept danger for yourself and another to ask a baby to share the consequences of your ideals. This problem will return in Vinland, but it begins here. The crew reaches Norway and meets a hunter named Hild. She lives apart from society, carries a sophisticated crossbow of her own design, and understands the forest with the same precision Thorfinn once brought to a battlefield. After helping the travelers survive an encounter with a bear, she hears Thorfinn's name and reveals why she has not forgotten it. 8 years earlier, Askeladd's band attacked her community. Hild's father, Hrafnkel, was a talented inventor who encouraged his daughter's intelligence. He could design pumps, tools, and machines, and Hild imagined becoming an inventor herself. When the raiders came, a younger Thorfinn killed him. Hild escaped with a terrible injury to her eye and was later raised by an old hunter. She transformed her father's gift for mechanisms into a new kind of crossbow and became patient enough to follow prey for days. All of that skill now points toward the man responsible for her loss. Thorfinn confesses immediately. He does not ask her to believe that he has changed, and he does not place all the blame on Askeladd or the age in which they lived. If she kills him, he believes he has no right to complain. Einar protests because the man Hild wants to punish is no longer the boy who committed the crime, but Hild knows that time does not return her family. She hunts Thorfinn through the forest. He refuses to attack her and uses all his old abilities simply to survive. Eventually, she has the shot she has wanted for years. Memories of her father and the hunter who raised her interrupt the final movement. Both men gave her knowledge so she could live, not so her whole life would narrow into one act of revenge. Hild chooses not to forgive Thorfinn, not yet. Instead, she gives him a borrowed life. She will travel with him and observe his attempt to build a peaceful country. If he kills again, she will execute him. Her crossbow becomes a judgment always present at the edge of his vision. The arrangement deliberately mirrors Thorfinn's years with Askeladd. Hild follows the person who killed her father, waiting for the proper moment to settle the debt. But unlike young Thorfinn, she does not abandon her own moral awareness. She watches, questions, protects Karli, and gradually becomes part of the group she claims merely to supervise. Traveling with the man she once hunted does not make Hild gentle toward him. She challenges every convenient version of his ideals. When Thorfinn says he will create a land without war, Hild asks what he will do when someone attacks it. When he says he will run, she asks how many times a community can uproot children and crops before flight becomes another kind of harm. Her skepticism keeps the dream from floating above practical reality. Gudrid approaches Thorfinn from the other direction. She has not seen him at his worst, and she is less interested in judging the warrior he used to be. She notices the quiet man who cares for Karli, listens when she speaks, and never assumes that being physically stronger gives him the right to decide her life. In a world of arranged marriages and male authority, this ordinary respect feels revolutionary. Thorfinn initially fails to recognize her affection. His emotional life has been buried under revenge and guilt for so long that romance seems like a language spoken around him. Gudrid's impatience brings warmth and comedy into a journey otherwise surrounded by old enemies. She can be impulsive, jealous, courageous, and frightened without being reduced to any one of those things. Karli turns the group into something closer to a household moving across the sea. Feeding him, calming him, and keeping him away from danger cannot be postponed until the political situation improves. His needs are immediate. Thorfinn discovers that fatherhood is made from small acts performed repeatedly, much like farming. Protection is not only defeating a threat, it is carrying a sleeping child while someone else repairs the sail. Bugeyes also becomes more important than his nervous manner suggests. He understands prices, accents, and the ways strangers signal whether a bargain is safe. A saga obsessed with famous warriors gradually gives essential work to a merchant who would rather avoid every duel. The expedition survives because different people know different things. Thorfinn's strength is useful, but it is no longer the center around which all value is measured. Their cargo of narwhal horns embodies that change. To a warrior, a ship full of ivory-looking tusks may seem less glorious than captured silver. To the travelers, the cargo can finance land, tools, livestock, and another voyage. Trade is not automatically innocent, but it offers a form of contact in which both sides can leave with something they chose to receive. The success of Vinland will depend on making exchange more powerful than seizure. This growing family makes Hild's judgment more complicated. Killing Thorfinn would not affect him alone. It would take a guardian from Karli, a partner from Einar, a hope from Gudrid, and the central organizer from the Vinland plan. Hild refuses to let those consequences erase her father's life, but she cannot pretend they do not exist. Justice becomes harder as the guilty person forms new responsibilities. Thorfinn never asks her to settle the question quickly. He accepts the crossbow behind him and continues the work in front of him. This patience is one of the clearest differences between atonement and a request for absolution. He does not perform good deeds in order to make Hild say the words he wants. He tries to live differently because living differently is now the only honest use of the life he still has. As the travelers move through the Baltic, the political past Thorfinn tried to leave begins closing around him. The Jomsvikings are approaching a succession crisis. Their old leader Sigvaldi is gone. Floki intends to place his 10-year-old grandson Balder at the head of the order, allowing Floki to control the military force through a child. Balder has royal Jomsviking blood, but so does Thorfinn through Helga's family. That makes Thorfinn an alternative candidate whether he wants the position or not. Floki once arranged Thor's murder partly to remove a rival and settle an old grudge. Now the existence of Thor's son threatens another succession plan. Captain Van leads a rebel faction within the Jomsvikings. He hates Floki and wants to stop Balder from becoming a puppet. When rumors spread that Thorfinn Karlsefni is alive and traveling east, Van hopes to use him as the rival leader around whom opposition can gather. Neither side cares that Thorfinn wants no part of Jomsborg. Thorkel also enters the conflict because a civil war involving Thor's son sounds entertaining. He has served Canute but remains fundamentally loyal to battle itself. Any struggle containing Jomsvikings, old family secrets, and strong opponents is irresistible. The eastern journey becomes trapped between these factions. Jomsvikings attack. Thorfinn and Hild help victims caught in the violence, including women treated as property by armed men. Their attempts to escape only make Thorfinn's ability more visible. Warriors who watch him move cannot accept that someone so skilled truly wants to be left alone. A young mercenary named Garm becomes obsessed with him. Garm carries a spear that can separate into shorter weapons, moves with animal speed, and experiences combat as play. He does not need money, patriotism, or revenge to kill. He fights because danger is the only thing that makes him feel alive. Garm is a vision of what Thorfinn might have become if Askeladd's death had not emptied him. He recognizes the former warrior beneath Thorfinn's peaceful behavior and demands a real fight. Thorfinn tries to avoid him, but Garm interprets refusal as an invitation to create better pressure. Floki uses Garm as an assassin. Garm is too uncontrollable to be a reliable tool, yet he is capable of moving between armies and killing commanders before anyone can react. He eventually murders Van, even though the wider consequences do not interest him. The death pushes Van's remaining men toward Thorkel and brings the civil war closer to Jomsborg. During these events, Thorfinn learns the truth about Floki. Van tells him that Askeladd was hired. The ambush in the Faroe Islands was not random mercenary work. Floki deliberately ordered the death of Thors. For a moment, 16 years of growth collapse. Thorfinn sees the man who set his entire tragedy in motion and reaches for a weapon. Rage returns with the clarity of an old language. Hild raises her crossbow. Her condition was simple. If Thorfinn becomes a killer again, the borrowed life ends. Balder places himself between Thorfinn and his grandfather. The child knows what Floki has done. His own parents were killed by political struggles, and Floki's desperate protection has turned his life into a prison. Balder says that if someone must pay for the succession plot, Thorfinn can kill him instead. The sight of a child offering his life breaks the revenge spell. Thorfinn remembers what it was like to stand beside the body of a father and build a future from hatred. Killing Floki would not remove the past. It would give Balder a version of the same wound. Thorfinn lowers the blade. Garm then kidnaps Leif, Einar, and Gudrid to force the fight he wants. Bug-Eyes is left to carry the message. Thorfinn must go toward the battlefield at Jomsborg, not because he wants to choose a faction, but because the people he loves are being used as bait. The fortress descends into chaos. Floki's loyalists, Van's former men, Thorkel's forces, and hired fighters collide without any single cause shared by all of them. Some want power, some want revenge, some obey commanders, some are simply excited. The battle illustrates how war can continue even after its original political question has become irrelevant. Once armed groups are moving, violence creates its own reasons. Jomsborg carries a special weight because it is the institution that made Thor's famous. Its walls, ships, laws, and treasure represent generations invested in the idea that disciplined violence creates order. The Jomsvikings are not random bandits. They have ranks, contracts, traditions, and standards of courage. That structure makes them more effective, but it does not answer the moral question Thor's asked when he deserted. Floki has spent his life preserving this world because it gives his life meaning. He distrusts Thorfinn not only as a political rival, but as evidence that Thor's rejection may have been correct. If the greatest warrior could leave, and his son can survive without killing, then the code Floki served is not inevitable. He would rather eliminate the exception than question the system. Balder experiences the cost of that devotion. Other adults look at his bloodline and see a solution to succession. They do not ask whether a 10-year-old wants to command armed men. Floki loves his grandson, but his love becomes control because he cannot imagine safety outside power. In trying to prevent anyone from using Balder, he uses the child himself. Thorkel represents a more honest version of the same culture. He does not pretend war is a reluctant tool for stability. He loves the test, the noise, the instant when skill and luck decide who remains standing. His honesty makes him strangely likable, but it does not make the bodies around him less dead. Vinland Saga allows his charisma to work and then asks the viewer to notice its price. The ordinary Jomsvikings have mixed reasons for remaining. Some need pay, some were raised in the fortress and know no other profession. Some believe loyalty to comrades is honorable even when commanders are corrupt. Disbanding them will not erase their skills or automatically turn them into farmers. Thorfinn can end an institution with an order, but each former warrior must still decide what to do when the order no longer decides for him. This is what makes Thorfinn's brief leadership so unusual. He does not seize the command in order to purify the organization or direct it toward a better war. He recognizes that the office itself is part of the problem. Power offers him the chance to become a benevolent version of the men who shaped his childhood. He uses it to make the office disappear. Canute's approval reveals how far the two boys from England have traveled. The king still pursues peace through control, while Thorfinn pursues it through relinquishment. Yet Canute understands that keeping the Jomsvikings intact would create a rival military power and accepts their dissolution. For a moment, moral purpose and royal calculation point toward the same act. The men released from service respond with confusion as well as celebration. Some are relieved, some are furious. A warrior identity promises that courage, masculinity, loyalty, income, and social worth can all be proven in the same place. Remove the battlefield, and each of those needs must find a different answer. Thorfinn cannot supply it for them, but he can stop the fortress from demanding that the answer be killing. Jomsborg's end also gives a different conclusion to Thor's desertion. Thor's escaped alone and left the institution standing behind him. Thorfinn returns as the unwilling heir and opens the gate for everyone. He goes farther than his father, exactly as Askeladd demanded, not by surpassing Thor's in combat, but by turning a private refusal into a public release. Garm fights Thorkel and survives an encounter that would kill almost anyone else. Then he finally receives the confrontation with Thorfinn. He mocks the vow of non-violence and insists that Thorfinn once enjoyed the same game. There is some truth in the accusation. The younger Thorfinn was not merely forced to fight. Parts of him took pride in skill, victory, and fear. Thorfinn does not beat Garm by becoming that person again. He uses a lesson learned from Askeladd. Garm can be controlled through emotion just as Thorfinn once was. A few precise insults make the mercenary reckless. Thorfinn reads the attack, moves inside the spear, and knocks him unconscious without taking his life. The victory completes an old circle. Askeladd repeatedly defeated Thorfinn because anger made him predictable. Now Thorfinn defeats a reflection of his younger self through understanding rather than hatred. He has not forgotten how to fight. He has finally learned what fighting was doing to his mind. The Jomsviking struggle ends with Thorkel's side in control and Floki captured. By blood and military circumstance, Thorfinn is declared the new leader of the Jomsvikings. It is almost absurd. The man most committed to escaping war now commands one of the greatest warrior brotherhoods in the north. He uses that authority once. Acting with the approval of King Canute, Thorfinn orders the Jomsvikings disbanded. Their wealth is distributed, their fortress loses its political role, and the warriors are released from service. Jomsborg, the institution that shaped Thor's, Floki, Thorkel, and generations of violence, ends not through conquest by a rival army, but through a leader refusing to preserve it. Thorfinn also spares Floki. The decision is not an announcement that Floki's crimes do not matter. It is a refusal to let another death govern the future. Floki leaves with Balder, stripped of the power for which he sacrificed so much. Balder, finally free from becoming a commander, encourages his grandfather to think about the simple problem of catching dinner. Thorkel is less satisfied. Thorfinn had once promised him a duel, and the giant expects payment. Gudrid steps between them and argues with one of the most dangerous men alive. Her fear, frustration, and obvious love for Thorfinn disarm the situation in a way a sword probably could not. Thorkel finds the whole thing amusing enough to let them go. Sigurd's pursuit also changes him. He and his companions are captured and experience slavery themselves. The humiliation teaches him how little the symbols of status mean when another person owns his body. By the time he reunites with Gudrid, he understands that dragging her home would only repeat the same domination. He releases her from the marriage. When Sigurd eventually returns to Iceland, he confronts Halfdan and rejects the life designed for him. Halfdan tests his resolve with violence, but Sigurd endures it. He chooses a family and future that are actually his own. The son who began by imitating the image of his father becomes worthy of inheritance only after he stops performing it. Thorfinn's company continues east. Their time in Greece is mostly left outside the main narrative, a deliberate gap after the long Baltic conflict. They sell the narwhal horns, trade successfully, and spend about 2 years completing the journey. When they finally return to Iceland, they possess the resources and experience required to attempt Vinland. Thorfinn and Gudrid marry. Together they adopt Karli, whose first family was taken by the same world that took so many others. Einar remains Thorfinn's brother in everything but blood. Hild remains with them, still carrying the crossbow and the unresolved judgment. Bugeyes remains eager to turn any meeting into a trade. The people who will sail west are no longer only an expedition crew. They are a family assembled from survivors. The marriage does not turn Gudrid into a passenger in Thorfinn's story. She has crossed the Baltic, cared for Karli under dangerous conditions, stood between Thorfinn and Thorkel, and learned the practical demands of long voyages. When the Vinland expedition begins, her authority comes from experience. She wanted the sea before she wanted Thorfinn, and the relationship works because he never asks her to abandon that part of herself. Their home is also deliberately unlike the household roles both inherited. Thorfinn does not imitate the distant warrior father he might have become, and Gudrid does not accept that child care or domestic work should make every other desire disappear. They argue, divide tasks imperfectly, rely on friends, and learn as they go. Vinland is meant to be a social experiment, but its smallest version begins in how two people share a life. Karli makes that experiment immediate. He is not Thorfinn's child by blood, just as Einar is not his brother by blood and Leif was never his biological father. Vinland Saga repeatedly builds family through chosen responsibility. The warrior world obsesses over lineage because blood determines inheritance and command. Thorfinn's family is held together by the decision to stay. Hild's place within it is the most unusual. She is at once a victim of Thorfinn's past, a potential executioner, a teacher, and an ant-like guardian to Karli. No simple label can contain the relationship. Her continued presence forces the household to live beside unresolved harm instead of hiding it. Trust grows before forgiveness is promised. Bugeyes belongs for similar reasons. His adoption by Leif gave him a name and future after slavery, but sharing Thorfinn's name sometimes leaves him feeling like the lesser version. He lacks the famous fighter's courage and reputation. Yet the Western project will eventually depend on his talent for languages more than on Thorfinn's ability to defeat a warrior. The story keeps rearranging who appears important. Einar completes the household as the person most committed to its physical foundation. He knows that dreams need roofs, drainage, fodder, seed, and labor scheduled before winter. Thorfinn can explain why a peaceful country should exist. Einar knows what people in that country will eat. Neither vision survives without the other. Together they make a small answer to the loneliness that shaped each of them. Gudrid escaped a life selected by relatives. Karli lost his parents. Hild lost her father. Bugeyes was sold. Einar's family was killed. Thorfinn abandoned his home and spent years beside men he could not love. Their new family does not erase those losses. It creates a place where loss is no longer the only bond available. The dream has survived kings, slavery, revenge, and a Jomsviking civil war. But surviving the violent world is not the same as building a peaceful one. Thorfinn must now persuade ordinary settlers to cross the Atlantic, obey rules they may not share, meet people whose language they do not speak, and trust that no weapon will be needed. The closer Vinland comes to becoming real, the more dangerous the dream becomes. Back in Iceland, Thorfinn begins recruiting. He does not promise treasure or conquest. He describes good land across the Western Sea where families can live without kings taking their crops and warriors burning their homes. People damaged by debt, poverty, status, and war hear something they need. Some are drawn by the soil, some want adventure, some simply have nowhere secure to remain. Thorfinn establishes the principle that will define the expedition. They will bring no swords. Axes are needed to cut timber. Knives are needed for work. Bows and Hild's crossbow can be used for hunting. A sword, however, exists primarily to kill human beings. Thorfinn believes that if the settlers arrive without a weapon designed for war, they will be forced to treat conversation and withdrawal as their first choices. The rule sounds dangerously naive to several recruits. One of them is Ivar, an Icelandic farmer who lost his property to Halfdan. Ivar owns an expensive sword and imagines using it to regain his independence. He has never lived through war in the way Thorfinn has, so the sword remains beautiful to him. It represents dignity, protection, and the ability to refuse another man's command. Ivar argues that a peaceful settlement still needs the power to defend itself. If strangers attack and there is no sword, then innocent people will die. Thorfinn answers that bringing the weapon changes how every uncertain meeting is understood. People who possess a sword begin looking for the moment that proves they needed it. The argument has no easy resolution because both men are responding to real dangers. Ivar's younger brother Styrk is quieter and more calculating. He believes Thorfinn's leadership will eventually fail. Rather than abandon the voyage, he persuades Ivar and their companion Ganglati to join, smuggle the sword aboard, and prepare to take control when the crisis comes. Ivar agrees, though he genuinely wants the colony to succeed. Stayek wants influence. The difference between their motives will matter later. Another recruit is Cordelia, a very tall and powerful woman who is enslaved on Halfdan's land. She was born in Ireland and originally given the name Holva. Her father is Thorkel. When Thorkel wanted to take the child into battle, Cordelia's mother protected her by insisting that she was a girl and raising her away from the warrior life he had planned. Cordelia grows to resemble Thorkel so strongly that strangers see only a huge warrior. What she wants is to live openly as a woman without being treated as a weapon or forced into a role chosen by others. After losing her mother and becoming enslaved, the proposed country without slavery offers the first place where that might be possible. Thorfinn's group helps secure her freedom and welcomes her. Cordelia is shy, gentle, and extraordinarily strong. Her presence quietly rejects the warrior world's assumption that physical power determines a person's nature. She could dominate many of the men around her. She would rather build houses and protect children. Halfdan, who once dismissed the entire project, now provides significant resources. Age and Sigurd's growth have changed the family. Halfdan still sees the world in terms of investment and obligation, but the successful Eastern trade proves Thorfinn is not merely dreaming. Ships, animals, grain, tools, and supplies are assembled. Varga, a former Jomsviking, becomes one of the experienced sailors responsible for crossing the Atlantic. In the spring of 1022, the ice clears enough for the western route. The settlers leave Iceland. Their ships carry families, livestock, timber, food, and all the small objects from which a new community must be made. Gudrid sails as an experienced member of the crew rather than a stowaway. Karli is old enough to fill the ship with questions. Einar watches the horizon for the country he and Thorfinn promised to Arnheid. The departure is less like a heroic charge than a controlled act of uncertainty. Every animal must be fed during the crossing. Fresh water must be protected. A torn sail, hidden leak, or week of contrary wind can consume the margin between discomfort and death. The settlers are not marching toward a known city. They are carrying the pieces of one across an ocean. Some people leave relatives behind with no certainty of return. Others bring their entire households, which means failure will not simply send an expedition home disappointed. It may strand children between coasts. Thorfinn has persuaded them with his credibility, so each risk becomes part of his responsibility even though he cannot control the sea. Leif's knowledge makes the voyage possible, but memory is not a map in the modern sense. Coastlines are recognized through the shape of mountains, the direction of currents, the flight of birds, and the time sailed between landmarks. Fog can hide the world. Storms can drive ships beyond any familiar route. Vinland is reached through accumulated experience shared across generations. Greenland provides a final northern threshold. Gudrid knows the settlements and the severe beauty of the coast. The travelers repair, resupply, and wait for favorable conditions. From there, the Western stories that once sounded impossible become a practical sequence. Sail toward the remembered land, locate timber, follow warmer coasts, and keep enough provisions to reverse course. At Markland, the abundance of forest is immediately valuable to people from regions where good timber can be scarce. But Thorfinn resists treating every useful coast as property waiting to be claimed. They gather what the expedition needs and continue. His behavior cannot erase the larger history that may follow, but it expresses the rule he is trying to establish. Use does not automatically create ownership. The settlers also know that people live across these lands. Earlier Norse voyages included fear and violence, so Thorfinn cannot assume his peaceful intent will arrive before the memory of other encounters. He carries the reputation of strangers he may never have met. This mirrors his own past. Sometimes a person must begin a relationship under the weight of harm done by members of the group to which others assign him. When Epiquick finally offers the combination of water, soil, shelter, and access they need, arrival does not complete the voyage. It changes the kind of work required. Ships that kept them alive at sea cannot feed them through winter. The settlers must read seasons they have never experienced, preserve enough food, and build before weather closes the opportunity. The first night on shore carries both relief and fear. The ground does not move, fires are lit, animals settle uneasily among new sounds. Beyond the circle of light is a country with its own inhabitants, and behind them is an ocean wide enough to prevent any quick rescue. Vinland has stopped being an idea. It can now disappoint, resist, and be harmed. Thorfinn has crossed farther than Thor's, but the moral distance remains to be traveled. Leaving swords behind was one decision made in Iceland. Living without them must be decided again whenever a noise comes from the trees, an animal disappears, food runs low, or another person refuses a request. The colony will be built from thousands of moments in which fear asks for an exception. They move through Greenland and then along the coasts Leif described. North America does not appear as one simple land. There are cold regions, stone forest, islands, rivers, and enormous distances. The Norse call one wooded area Markland. Farther south and west lies the place they understand as Vinland. The settlement is built on Epiquick, the island now known as Prince Edward Island, within the traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq. In the manga, the people who live there call themselves the LNU. They are not wandering figures waiting for Europeans to give the land a name. They have communities, roots, beliefs, rivalries, knowledge, and a history that exists independently of the newcomers. Thorfinn chooses an open area near forest and water. The settlers unload animals, raise temporary shelters, and begin the long work of turning an expedition camp into a village. Trees fall, wells are dug, walls rise around homes not as fortifications but as protection from weather. The first fields are measured and broken. Einar brings out a statue of a woman discovered during the journey through Greece. The face reminded him of Arnheid, and he carried it across the world. They placed the figure in the settlement and named their new home Arnheid Village. A woman who spent much of her life as property becomes the symbolic guardian of a place, founded on the promise that no person will be owned. For a time the dream works. Decisions are discussed among the settlers. Work is shared. There is no king, no warrior class, and no slave labor hidden beneath the fields. Thorfinn does not behave like a lord. He carries timber, farms, listens to complaints, and tries to make leadership disappear into cooperation. The absence of formal ranks does not remove every difference among them. Some settlers own more tools, some have stronger families, some speak with the confidence of men accustomed to being heard. Thorfinn must notice when an assembly that appears equal is being guided by the loudest voices. A community can reproduce hierarchy without ever giving someone a crown. Food is the first shared measure of success. Stored supplies cannot last forever, so fishing, hunting, planting, and preserving must begin immediately. The settlers learn which familiar crops tolerate the new conditions and which expectations from Iceland do not apply. The land is generous in some ways and unfamiliar in others. Calling it fertile does not mean it is empty or effortless. Livestock create both security and tension. Cattle and sheep offer milk, wool, meat, and manure, but they also require grazing land and can damage plants used by the LNU. A fence that looks like sensible farming to a Norse settler can look like a claim of ownership to someone whose community moves through the area. Neither side needs to intend an insult for the landscape to begin carrying two incompatible meanings. Thorfinn tries to make settlement reversible. He wants homes and fields, but he does not want stone walls, castles, or a military port that would make departure feel impossible. This caution frustrates people who crossed an ocean to build a permanent life. They ask a fair question: if they must always be ready to leave, when are they allowed to call the place home? Einar feels this conflict most strongly. He has lost land repeatedly. Raiders took the farm of his childhood. Slavery took the field he might have inherited. Ketil's violence destroyed the place where Arnheid lived. Vinland is supposed to end that pattern. For him, putting down roots is not greed, it is recovery. Thorfinn carries a different memory. He remembers villages entered by armed strangers who assumed their needs mattered more than the people already there. Even peaceful settlers can become those strangers if their definition of home requires everyone else to yield. His willingness to leave is not a lack of love for the village. It is the limit he places on what love is allowed to justify. These differences remain manageable while the harvest looks promising and meetings with the LNU remain friendly. Shared labor creates its own rhythm. Roofs are repaired before rain. Children wander between homes. Meals stretch when visitors arrive. A settlement founded through grand speeches becomes real through chores no saga would normally record. Arnheid's statue watches over this daily life without knowing any of it. Einar speaks to the stone because the actual woman was denied the future they are building in her name. The monument comforts him, but it also binds his grief to a physical place. When Thorfinn later suggests evacuation, Einar will hear more than a change of plan. He will hear that Arnheid is being abandoned again. The village therefore contains the final conflict long before anyone draws a weapon. It contains people who need permanence and a leader committed to withdrawal. It contains a ban accepted by some and secretly rejected by others. It contains useful iron, vulnerable families, cultural misunderstandings, and a promise whose meaning has never been identical for everyone. None of this makes collapse certain. It makes peace a living arrangement rather than an empty absence of battle. Every day without war depends on trust, translation, restraint, food, weather, health, and the belief that tomorrow's disagreement will also be survivable. The miracle is not that such an arrangement eventually fails. The miracle is that people manage to create it at all. Hild studies the new environment, improves tools, and teaches Karli. Her crossbow remains nearby, but it is used for hunting. The hunter who once followed Thorfinn only to judge him begins investing her skill in the future of the village. Gudrid organizes daily life and refuses to let the men's grand theories excuse them from ordinary responsibilities. Einar pours himself into the wheat. Their first contact with the LNU comes through a man named PLMK. He observes the strange animals and unfamiliar people from the forest. Both sides are cautious. The Norse do not speak his language and he does not speak theirs. A movement intended as a greeting can look like an attack. A tool can look like a weapon. Thorfinn keeps his hands visible and his behavior calm. Food and objects are exchanged. Curiosity slowly outruns fear. PLMK becomes the first bridge between the settlers and nearby LNU families, returning to learn what the newcomers are doing and to show them how he understands the land. Bugeyes begins learning the LNU language with a young woman named Niskawajij, often called Niska. Their lessons are awkward and funny. A word is demonstrated with gestures, repeated badly and corrected. The process does more than produce a translator. Each new word makes the person on the other side harder to reduce to a threatening mystery. Niska is a pupil of the shaman Misqueki Pudge. He is older, observant, and much less willing to assume that the visitors are harmless. The Norse cut trees, bring livestock, and alter the land. Even if they speak gently today, more ships may follow. Misquekipudge understands that a small change can become permanent before anyone recognizes it. Thorfinn tries to explain the settlement's rules through drawings and demonstration. They have come to farm. They do not intend to take slaves. They do not carry swords. If conflict cannot be solved, they will leave rather than fight. To Thorfinn, these promises distinguish Arnheid village from every invading force he has known. To Misquekipudge, promises made by one generation cannot control the people who may arrive later. He performs a spiritual ritual and experiences a vision reaching far beyond the 11th century. He sees ships multiply, forests disappear, unfamiliar cities cover the land. and weapons become more destructive than anything the Norse possess. He sees indigenous people displaced, hunted, confined, and killed by systems the first settlers could never fully imagine. Whether the vision is supernatural or a way of expressing historical memory, its meaning is clear. The danger is not only Thorfinn. The path Thorfinn opens may be used by people nothing like him. Misquequipudge becomes convinced that the Nords must leave before the future can take root. This gives the final conflict a painful complexity. The shaman is not simply afraid of difference. His fear points toward a real future of colonization and catastrophe. Thorfinn is sincere, but sincerity cannot erase the unequal risk. If the experiment fails, the Norse can sail home. The LNU may lose part of the country that is already theirs. In the settlement, Ivar notices every sign of tension. A spear held during a misunderstanding confirms his suspicion that walls and weapons are necessary. Stayek encourages the fear while presenting himself as a reasonable observer. Ganglati follows Ivar's lead. The hidden sword remains aboard like a solution waiting for a problem. Yet months pass without war. LNU visitors come to trade and talk. Children accept one another more quickly than adults. The settlers learn local foods and routes. The LNU examine iron tools. There are arguments and mistakes, but there are also ordinary friendships which are less dramatic and more important. The wheat survives the winter. When the green crop rises in early summer of 1023, Einar sees proof that Arnheid village can feed itself. The field connects the farmland of his childhood, the plot he cleared with Thorfinn as a slave, and the promise made over Arnheid's grave. For once, the crop has not been torn up or burned. Gudrid announces that she is pregnant. Thorfinn is delighted and frightened. He has carried the image of his father for most of his life, first as a reason for revenge and then as a moral standard he fears he cannot reach. Now he will become a father himself. The future of Vinland is no longer theoretical. His own children will live inside whatever his decisions create. Hild chooses this moment to release the judgment she has carried. She has watched Thorfinn refuse revenge against Floki, dissolve the Jomsvikings, protect strangers, raise Karli, cross the ocean, and spend his strength building a village. The boy who killed Hrafnkel cannot be separated from this man, but neither can he be the only truth about him. Hild tells Thorfinn that she forgives him. The borrowed life is now his own. The words break through a burden Thorfinn assumed he would carry forever. Forgiveness does not bring Hild's father back, and it does not declare the murder acceptable. It means Hild no longer wants the worst day of her life to control every day after it. For Thorfinn, it is evidence that atonement cannot change the past but can create a future in which the past does not repeat. This is the emotional height of Arnheid village. The wheat grows, a child is coming, Hild forgives. The Norse and LNU have begun speaking. If the story ended there, Vinland would be a reward for Thorfinn's moral growth. But Vinland Saga does not treat peace as a prize one good man can win and keep. Disease enters the relationship. The Norse carry illnesses to which they have some resistance and the LNU do not. People in the nearby communities become sick. The settlers did not poison them deliberately, but intention offers no protection from fever and death. Families who recently traded with Arnheid village now bury relatives. The sickness confirms the warning in Misquequipudge's vision. Even peaceful contact can be devastating when populations have been separated for generations. Thorfinn can forbid swords, but he cannot forbid microbes. The most dangerous thing the settlers bring may be something none of them can see. Trust begins disappearing. LNU visitors stop coming. Each absence allows rumors to grow. Among the Norse, Ivar's supporters say the silence proves an attack is being prepared. Among the LNU, some say the settlers brought death and must be driven into the sea. People interpret uncertainty through the fears they already hold. No one can see the complete chain of infection. A trader may feel healthy when he visits and becomes sick later. A family may blame the last stranger they met even if the illness passed through several camps. Without a shared medical explanation, every pattern can support a different story. The lack of knowledge does not produce humility, it produces competing certainty. Thorfinn offers help, but even help is ambiguous. Entering a sick community may spread more illness. Refusing to enter may look like abandonment. Norse food and remedies may be welcomed by one family and rejected by another. Good intention keeps colliding with consequences no individual can control. Misquequepudge sees the epidemic as confirmation that separation is necessary. PLMK sees friends inside the settlement and resists reducing them to the disease they unknowingly brought. Niska's role as translator becomes emotionally dangerous because every explanation can sound like an excuse. She is asked to carry grief between languages when neither language contains words capable of making the loss fair. Among the settlers, parents do not debate in the abstract. They imagine LNU warriors approaching while their children sleep. Ivar's argument gains power because it addresses a fear people can picture. Thorfinn's answer asks them to trust a relationship that the epidemic has already damaged. Even settlers who admire him begin wondering whether his experience has made him wise or merely unable to admit that Vinland is different from the battles he knew. This is how Styac gathers influence. He rarely needs to invent a fact. He selects the most frightening interpretation of real events and repeats it until preparation feels like common sense. A missing visitor becomes a scout avoiding detection. A council becomes a war meeting. A request to remove the sword becomes proof that Thorfinn values an ideal above his own people. Thorfinn makes mistakes as well. He has spent years learning to distrust weapons, but not enough time building a decision process for people who do not share that conclusion. He treats the no-sword rule as the moral foundation of the settlement. To Ivar, it remains one leader's policy, imposed before the settlers knew what danger they might face. Their disagreement about violence is also a disagreement about consent. The village assembly therefore carries every unresolved question into one place. Who has authority to change the rules? Do the LNU representatives speak for every group that may approach? Does Thorfinn have the right to promise evacuation on behalf of families who invested everything in the crossing? Does a hidden sword become legitimate if it saves one life, or illegitimate because secrecy destroys the trust on which all lives depend? There is no procedure capable of settling those questions quickly. Arnheid village was designed as an escape from kingship, but the absence of a king does not remove the need for collective decisions under pressure. Consensus works slowly. Fear moves fast. The sword gives fear a physical object around which to organize. Cordelia discovers Ivar's hidden sword. He and Styac ask her to remain silent, arguing that the weapon may protect everyone. Cordelia understands the desire for safety, but she also understands what it means when powerful people decide that rules apply only to others. At a public assembly, she reveals the truth. The village divides. Some settlers feel betrayed by Ivar. Others feel betrayed by Thorfinn for asking families to remain defenseless. The debate is no longer about one object. It is about authority, trust, and who carries the cost if Thorfinn is wrong. Thorfinn invites LNU representatives to the assembly, hoping open discussion will stop the split from becoming permanent. Misquequepudge comes with a plan of his own. He believes the Norse will never understand the danger until blood changes the relationship. During the meeting, he seizes an axe and moves toward Thorfinn. Thorfinn orders everyone not to react. He has read the situation and believes he can avoid the blow. Ivar sees only a weapon moving toward their leader. He draws the smuggled sword and cuts off Misquequepudge's hand. The sword is used for exactly the purpose Ivar predicted, defending someone from an apparent attack. It also creates exactly the disaster Thorfinn predicted. Blood falls in the center of the assembly. The LNU see an elder mutilated by a weapon unlike their own. The settlers see proof that the LNU tried to kill Thorfinn. Each side now possesses an image that can justify fear. Ivar is not lying when he says he acted to save Thorfinn. From his position, hesitation could have meant watching the leader die. Thorfinn is not lying when he says the intervention was unnecessary. His combat experience allowed him to judge the distance, grip, and intention more accurately. The tragedy comes from two honest perceptions separated by a fraction of a second. Misquequipudge also intended to create a frightening moment without losing his own hand. He believed a controlled shock would expose the weapon and force the danger into public view. Like Askeladd, Canute, Styac, and Hild at different points in the story, he accepts a limited act of violence to prevent a greater future one. The result exceeds his plan. After the strike, explanation cannot return the hand or erase the sight of iron cutting flesh. Images travel more easily than motives. People who were not at the assembly hear simplified versions. The LNU attacked during peace talks, or the Nords maimed an elder who came to speak. Both stories contain enough truth to survive, and each removes the detail that might complicate revenge. The blade changes Ivar too. He expected that drawing it would produce clarity. A threat would appear, a defender would act, and everyone would understand why the rule had been foolish. Instead, half the village praises him and half looks at him as the person who destroyed the peace. The decisive moment he imagined creates a more confusing world than the one before it. Thorfinn rushes to stop the bleeding. Ivar cannot understand why he helps the man who threatened him. Thorfinn recognizes that the categories are already hardening. Friend and enemy, settler and native, victim and aggressor. Once everyone accepts those labels, every compassionate act begins to look like betrayal. Misquequipudge leaves alive, but his plan succeeds. Arnheid village builds a defensive wall. More iron weapons are made. Watches are organized. LNU families prepare for the possibility of removing the settlers. The settlement created to escape the logic of Europe reconstructs it in a single season. Styac quietly pushes Ivar toward leadership. He tells people that Thorfinn is kind but incapable of protecting them. He treats every new fortification as proof of wisdom, even though the fortifications also make the village look more permanent and threatening. Security measures answer fear while producing more of it. Einar becomes increasingly frustrated with Thorfinn. To him, leaving would mean abandoning Arnheid again. They crossed the ocean, raised homes, and grew food with their own hands. The LNU have vast land, while the settlers occupy a small area. Einar cannot accept that fear should erase years of labor and the only memorial that has ever felt equal to Arnheid's suffering. Thorfinn understands him, but he reaches the opposite conclusion. A country without war cannot begin by claiming the right to remain against the wishes of people already living there. If the price of Arnheid village is a battle, the village has contradicted its own reason for existing. His first line of defense is negotiation. His final line is evacuation. The disagreement wounds their friendship. Einar was the person who pulled Thorfinn out of emptiness, taught him to farm, and dreamed of Vinland beside him. Yet Einar is not a disciple. He has his own grief and judgment. Peace is easier to agree upon when it does not demand surrendering the field that gives your life meaning. Hild, meanwhile, identifies Ivar and Styac as immediate dangers. She prepares traps in the forest and considers killing them before they can start a war. Her reasoning is chillingly familiar. Take a few lives now to save many later. It resembles Canute's logic and the logic of every preventive war. She captures Ganglati and Styac in non-lethal traps and confronts Ivar. During the encounter, Styac admits more than he intended. He has exaggerated threats because he expected Thorfinn to fail and wanted Ivar positioned to replace him. Ivar is genuinely upset. He wanted the sword because he believed in defense, not because he wanted to manufacture a war. Hild still prepares to shoot. Thorfinn arrives and stops her. He knows better than anyone how reasonable revenge and preventive violence can feel from inside the decision. Killing Ivar would remove a man, not the fear shared by half the village. Thorfinn decides on one more diplomatic attempt. He, Einar, Bugeyes, Hild, PLMK and Niska travel to meet LNU leaders. Gudrid remains behind because her pregnancy is near its end. The timing leaves Arnheid village without the one person both factions still recognize as leader. At the meeting, Miss Queckipudge calls for the settlers to leave. Some LNU leaders want to wait until spring, giving the Norse time to sail safely. Others, including men angered by disease and the severed hand, demand immediate action. Niska translates as best she can while the room fills with voices that no single person fully controls. Thorfinn agrees to departure. He does not win permission to keep the dream. He chooses lives over the settlement, yet agreement at a council cannot instantly reach every armed person in the forest. A raiding leader named Gajoki has his own purpose. He is not simply acting for all LNU. He wants iron weapons, especially the mysterious sword, and sees the confused conflict as an opportunity. While the main leaders are meeting, he takes a group to Arnheid village. Gudrid goes into labor as the attack begins. Gajoki's men kill settlers in an outlying house and set it on fire. Smoke rises over the village that was built to contain no war. Cordelia gathers Carly and helps protect the women and children. Her enormous body, inherited from Thorkel, becomes a shield rather than an instrument of attack. The raiders reach Thorfinn's home. Cordelia stands in the doorway and refuses to move. She is terrified, but she will not answer violence with killing. Arrows and blows cannot easily bring her down. The image resembles Thor's on the ship in the Faroe Islands. Overwhelming physical strength used to place one body between danger and other people. Elsewhere, Ivar organizes the settlers who remain. Whatever his mistakes, he does not run from the consequences. He sends the vulnerable toward protection and meets the attackers with the men available. Ganglati throws himself over Ivar when arrows fall and is killed. Gajoki finds the hidden sword. Ivar reaches for an axe to avenge his friend, and the weapon he carried across the ocean is turned against him. Gajoki cuts off Ivar's hand. The supposed guarantee of Norse safety becomes a prize that gives the attacker a new advantage. The meeting in the forest also collapses. Niska leads Thorfinn, Einar, Bugeyes, and Hild away while men who reject the spring deadline pursue them. Thorfinn is badly wounded. His ability cannot solve the crisis because the problem is no longer a duel with one opponent. Violence is happening in different places among people acting on incomplete information. As he drifts near unconsciousness, Thorfinn imagines the arguments inside himself as familiar figures. Thorkel represents the seduction of strength and the claim that battle is simply human nature. Ivar represents defensive fear. Einar represents the home and people Thorfinn may abandon. His own past tells him that he knows how to end a threat quickly if he will only permit himself to become a killer again. Hild answers that inner pressure through her actions. The woman who once demanded Thorfinn's death protects his wounded body and insists that his path still matters. Forgiveness has made her the guardian of the principle she once doubted. PLMK helps them survive. Thorfinn's life is saved not by hidden force, but by relationships built before the crisis. Einar and Bugeyes make it back toward Arnheid village ahead of him. They see burning homes and frightened settlers. Bugeyes and Vargar focus on evacuation, moving women, children, and anyone unwilling to fight toward the ships. This is the unglamorous work upon which survival depends. Einar cannot leave the field. The village bears Arnheid's name and people he knows are under attack. He takes up an axe. The farmer who once pulled Thorfinn away from murder now kills for the first time while defending the settlement. The act does not turn Einar into a villain. It demonstrates why the cycle is so difficult to escape. He is not fighting for plunder or pleasure. He has good reasons: friends, homes, crops, and the memory of a woman abused by power. Nearly every war is filled with people who can name something worth protecting. Ivar, wounded and separated from the identity he built around the sword, finally sees the gap between imagined battle and actual war. Ganglati is dead. The weapon did not prevent the attack. Stayek's manipulation helped prepare the conditions. Ivar continues fighting and soon dies from the conflict and his wounds, no longer the triumphant defender he pictured in Iceland. Stayek reacts to these deaths by demanding that they mean something. If the settlers accept peace now, then Ivar and Ganglati appear to have died for nothing. This is one of war's most durable traps. Past loss becomes a reason for future loss because stopping feels like an insult to the dead. By the time Thorfinn and Hild return with LNU leaders willing to negotiate, the two sides have already killed each other. Thorfinn asks for a truce and promises the settlers will leave. Gajaki is prepared to accept the end because he has obtained the sword and because continued battle carries its own risks. Einar stands among the Norse fighters with blood on his hands. He sees Thorfinn and finally understands the burden his friend has carried. Killing one person does not make the next death easier in the way warrior stories promise. It makes the world heavier. Einar supports the truce. Stayek cannot. He tries to launch one final surprise attack against Gajaki, hoping to restart the battle and avenge his brother. Einar grabs him before the strike lands. In panic and fury, Stayek drives a blade into Einar's neck. Gajaki then kills Stayek with Ivar's sword. The fighting stops, but the peace arrives one heartbeat too late for the person who helped imagine it. Thorfinn catches Einar. His brother is bleeding beyond any hope of recovery. Einar thinks of Arnheid and wonders what he can tell her if there is an afterlife now that he is killed. The peaceful country they promised her has collapsed. The field they planted will be abandoned. Thorfinn does not condemn him. He knows that Einar acted inside fear and grief, just as he once did. The difference between them is no longer innocence and guilt. It is that one has had years to learn how to carry the weight and the other has only moments. Einar dies in Vinland. The death is devastating because Einar was never pursuing the heroic ending offered to warriors. He did not cross the sea to become famous. He wanted a field no raider could burn, a family no master could divide, and enough safety to remain an ordinary farmer. The world repeatedly treats those modest desires as if they were unreasonable luxuries. He is also the person who made Thorfinn's second life possible. When they met, Thorfinn had skill without purpose and guilt without any belief in repair. Einar supplied work, conversation, anger, humor, and the stubborn expectation that another future existed. Thorfinn may be the expedition's recognized leader, but the road to Vinland began with two enslaved men cutting trees together. Their friendship survives disagreement because neither man becomes a symbol for the other. Einar does not always accept Thorfinn's judgment. Thorfinn does not demand obedience in exchange for gratitude. They can wound each other over the decision to evacuate and still reach for one another when the battle stops. That complexity is what makes them brothers rather than leader and follower. For Thorfinn, catching Einar recalls every body he was too late to save. Thor's beneath the arrows, Askeladd in Knut's hall, Arnheid after Ketil's beating, and the many victims he never knew by name. But Einar's death is different because it occurs inside the dream they built together. There is no enemy commander to blame for invading from far away. The chain of decisions includes friends, settlers, frightened leaders, and Thorfinn himself. He could answer the grief by identifying Stayek as the cause, Gajaki as the enemy, or Misquekipudge as the man who began the crisis at the assembly. Each label would contain part of the truth. None would contain enough. Stayek is already dead. Another killing cannot reverse the one that just occurred. Thorfinn remains with Einar instead of converting loss into a new mission. The survivors have little time for mourning. Boats must be loaded before another faction changes its mind or weather blocks departure. Injured people need care. Families search for missing relatives. Animals, tools, food, and seed compete for limited space. The settlers must decide what part of years of labor can fit on a ship and what will be left to decay. Some possessions become suddenly meaningless. A heavy piece of furniture that made a cabin feel permanent cannot justify risking a life. Other small objects carry unbearable weight. A tool used by someone who died, a child's gift, a handful of grain from the first crop. Evacuation turns material value into a series of intimate judgments. Thorfinn does not try to preserve Arnheid village as a Norse claim that can be restored later. The promise to leave must be real. He accepts that buildings, fences, and fields will pass out of settler control. This surrender separates withdrawal from a temporary military retreat. He is not waiting for reinforcements. He is ending the colony. For the LNU, the departure does not undo the epidemic or revive the people killed in battle. Nor does every LNU person agree about what the settlers meant. PLMK loses friends who brought him unfamiliar knowledge. Misquequipudge sees a dangerous future delayed. Gajaki leaves with a weapon that may shift power among local groups. Their community does not become a single moral voice simply because the foreigners sail away. The final conversations occur in that uncertainty. Thorfinn cannot ask PLMK to remember only the good days, and he cannot demand that Misquequipudge trust the sincerity of a failed experiment. He can acknowledge the harm, keep the agreement, and offer what may still be useful. Wheat seed and a hoe are humble because they come without a continuing claim over the harvest. This makes Einar present in the last gift. The seed carries the knowledge of the English farm where he grew up, Ketil's fields where he taught Thorfinn, the crop destroyed by resentful workers, and the wheat he raised in Vinland. A life repeatedly uprooted becomes part of something planted after death. The mark on his grave, Frida, can mean peace in several connected senses: an absence of fighting, a reconciliation, a condition in which people are not under threat. Einar receives none of those meanings completely while alive. The word is therefore not a summary. It is a vow placed beside a failure. Thorfinn leaves the grave knowing he cannot fulfill the vow once and be finished. There will be new shores, new disagreements, and a son growing up in a world still organized by kings and weapons. Peace will not be inherited automatically. It must be taught through the same ordinary acts by which hatred is usually taught: stories, habits, examples, and the choices adults make while children watch. They bury him beside the statue that reminded him of Arnheid. Thorfinn mourns the cruel pattern of his friend's life. War destroyed Einar's first farm, sold him into slavery, killed Arnheid, followed him across the ocean, and reached him even in the village built to escape it. On the grave they mark the word Frida, peace. The word does not describe the life Einar received. It describes what he continued wanting despite that life. His death is not proof that peace is foolish. It is proof that peace cannot be treated as a place safely waiting beyond the horizon. It must be made among frightened people again and again, and it can fail even when the people trying are sincere. The terms of the truce are clear. The Norse will leave. Arnheid village is dismantled or abandoned. The ships take on survivors, supplies, and as much as can be carried. Homes built over years become empty structures. The wheat field that once proved the dream possible is left behind. Before departing, Thorfinn speaks with Misquequipudge. The shaman has opposed the settlement and lost a hand in the process, but he no longer treats Thorfinn as a simple enemy. Both men have seen their warnings come true, and neither feels victorious. Thorfinn asks what can be done about the human tendency toward conflict. Misquequipudge cannot promise that the LNU will live without war after the settlers leave. Rival groups, fear, pride, and weapons already exist. Removing the Norse removes this particular crisis, not every future one. That answer changes the meaning of Vinland for the last time. Thorfinn once believed he could travel far enough to find a country outside violence. Now he understands that no geography can guarantee it. Wherever people go, they carry memory, status, fear, tools, and the desire to protect what they love. The work is not finding a land without enemies. The work is refusing to manufacture enemies where you stand. Thorfinn says goodbye to PLMK. Their friendship survived disease, division, and war, though it could not preserve the colony. Thorfinn leaves him wheat seed and a hoe. He explains how to prepare the ground, sow, and wait. It is the smallest version of the dream, not possession of the field, but shared knowledge that may feed someone after he is gone. Gayaki keeps the sword. From the departing ship, Thorfinn calls for him to throw it away before it creates another disaster. Gayaki dismisses the warning. He sees power in the blade, just as Ivar did. Thorfinn cannot force him to surrender it without repeating the logic he opposes. Bugeyes then reveals that Niska has come with him. Their work learning one another's languages became love, and they intend to marry. They do not plan to let the war decide that people from their worlds must remain permanently separate. They choose to search for their own somewhere else. Thorfinn is surprised but accepts their decision. The relationship does not solve the history between the communities. It is simply one bond that fear failed to destroy. A saga filled with kings arranging marriages for power ends, one of its last relationships with two translators choosing each other. The departing group reunites with the women and children who were moved to a nearby uninhabited island for safety. Gudrid has survived the birth. She places a newborn boy in Thorfinn's arms. The child is Snorri. In the old historical sagas, Snorri Thorfinnsson is remembered as the first European child known to have been born in North America. In Vinland Saga, his arrival follows the death of Einar and the collapse of the settlement. Thorfinn holds grief and new life at the same time. Carly looks toward the future with the stubborn simplicity of a child. If peace was not made here, then perhaps it can be attempted somewhere else, or later, or by people not yet born. Thorfinn has learned not to promise success. He can only promise that failure will not make him worship the methods that caused it. Back on Epiquick, PLMK follows the instructions he was given. He breaks the soil, places the wheat seed, covers it, and waits. For a while, nothing happens. A person judging only the empty surface might decide the gift has failed. Then a green shoot emerges. This is the final image of Vinland Saga. Not a battlefield, crown, sword, or ship. Not even Thorfinn. The story ends with wheat growing through the soil after the colony has gone. The seed does not erase the deaths. It does not mean European arrival will become harmless or that Misquequepud's vision has been defeated. It means contact left more than a weapon and a grave. PLMK takes knowledge freely offered and makes it part of his own future. Something created through cooperation survives the collapse of the people who began it. Thorfinn does not achieve the paradise he imagined beside Arnheid's grave. Canute does not complete a paradise through kingship either. Both men confront the same limit from opposite directions. A king can command armies but cannot command human beings to stop fearing one another. An explorer can remove swords but cannot remove every cause of conflict. Peace built as a final structure will crack. Peace practiced as a choice can be made again. Thors understood part of this before anyone else. A true warrior needs no sword because the greatest strength is not domination. It is the capacity to absorb fear, pride, and pain without automatically handing them to someone weaker. Thors demonstrated it once on a ship and died before he could build a larger life around it. Thorfinn spends the entire saga learning how to extend that moment. He first misunderstands his father and becomes a killer. He then rejects violence because he hates himself. Later, he chooses non-violence because he loves other people. Finally, in Vinland, he learns that personal purity is not enough. A leader must listen to fears he does not share, plan for consequences he cannot control, and remain willing to abandon his own monument before it becomes another person's prison. Askeladd also remains part of that growth. He killed Thors, used Thorfinn, and filled England with death. Yet he taught the boy to read people, think beyond the next strike, and refuse to waste a life on an empty obsession. Thorfinn's family is shaped by three fathers. Thor's gives him the ideal, Askeladd gives him the knowledge of a brutal world, and Leif gives him the horizon beyond it. Einar gives him something equally important. He gives him a brother. Without Einar, Thorfinn may never have climbed from the pit of his own guilt. Without their field, Vinland would remain a childhood story rather than a project. Einar does not live to see the final green shoot, but the wheat PLMK plants comes through the chain of farming knowledge that Einar helped carry west. Hild proves that forgiveness is not forgetfulness. She watches Thorfinn long enough to judge the person he chooses to become, and then protects that choice when he can no longer protect himself. Gudrid proves that freedom is not only escape, it is the right to build a family and sail toward a life no one arranged for you. Cordelia proves that great strength can be gentle without becoming false. Bugeyes and Niska prove that language can create a home between worlds, even when politics tears those worlds apart. And the ending refuses the comfort of a perfect victory. Arnheid village fails, Einar dies, the settlers leave. Gajaki keeps the sword. The future still contains the colonization Misquequepudge feared. Yet calling the attempt meaningless would repeat Stayek's mistake, the belief that sacrifice only matters if conflict continues until someone wins. The village mattered because for a while people lived without slavery. Hild forgave there. Carly grew there. Norse and LNU learned words from one another there. Wheat crossed from one tradition into another there. Peace existed not as an eternal condition, but as real days in the lives of real people. That is why the completed story ends somewhere between tragedy and hope. Thorfinn cannot find a magical country where humanity's problems disappear. He finds something harder, the understanding that Vinland must be made wherever a person decides not to turn fear into hatred. It may last a year. It may last only long enough to save one life. It may fail and need to begin somewhere else. The child at the start of the story believed a warrior became great by defeating an enemy. The man at the end measures greatness by what can grow after he leaves. His journey does not finish with conquest of the new world. It finishes with relinquishing his claim to it. Far from Iceland, beyond the roots of kings and Viking armies, a farmer named PLMK waits beside an unfamiliar crop. The first leaves rise in a land that already had its own name. Somewhere across the water, Thorfinn holds his newborn son and carries the memory of Einar. The sword remains dangerous, the grave remains full, but the seed grows anyway. And that is the entire story of Vinland Saga, from beginning to end. Not the discovery of a peaceful land, but the lifelong, unfinished attempt to become a person capable of making peace.